The meeting is now live.
Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Communities Overview Committee. I am Cecilia Motley, Chair of this committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. This meeting is being held using remote technology, and should any committee member experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately contact the designated IT officer on the number they've already been supplied with. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak. Do not use it for anything else, so that it is clear who is asking to talk. The debate has to be heard by those listening to the audio feed. As chair, I will interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. I will ask members of the committee to confirm their presence and any disposable pecuniary interests they have in any of the items on the agenda. I will ask everyone that speaks during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time they speak. This is so those listening know who is speaking. I shall now turn to the items on the agenda. Item 1, apologies. Can the committee officer confirm if there are any apologies and substitutions?
Thank you, Chair. It's Emily Marshall, committee officer. I can confirm there are no apologies for absence.
Thank you very much. Item 2, roll call and disclosable pecuniary interests. Members are reminded to disclose any pecuniary interest in any matters to be discussed which are not included in the register of interests, and leave the meeting prior to the matter being discussed. I will now read out each member's name and ask them to confirm their presence and confirm if there are any interests. I am Councillor Cecilia Motley, Chair of the Communities and Overview Committee, and I confirm that I have no disclosable pecuniary interests. Councillor Nick Hignett.
Councillor Nick Hignett, Ray Valley Ward. I am present and I have no pecuniary interests.
Councillor Ted Clark.
Ted Clark, nothing to declare, thank you.
Councillor Nigel Hartin.
Hello, Chair. Yes, Councillor Nigel Hartin, Clan Division, nothing to declare.
Councillor Roger Hughes.
Roger Hughes, no interest.
Councillor Viv Parry.
Yes, Viv Parry here. No pecuniary interests.
Councillor Keith Roberts.
Sorry, Ludlow South. Sorry,
Thank
I just
you.
had a little bit of difficulty with my screen there. It went off, but it's come back on again then.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Councillor Keith Roberts.
Present, Chair, no peculiar interests.
Councillor Leslie Winwood.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. No pecuniary interests. Member for Bridge North West and Tasley.
Councillor Tina Woodward.
Present and no pecuniary interests, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, I move that the minutes of the Communities Overview Committee meeting held on the 25th of January 2021, as circulated, be signed as a correct record. Can I have a seconder, please?
Keith Roberts, Chair, I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Keith. I will now accept these minutes as a true record unless anyone else indicates differently. No one indicates differently, thank you. Item 4, public question time. No public questions have been received. Item 5, member question time. No member questions have been received. Item 6, Chairman's update. I will now give my update, but forgive me if I fiddle around with my papers for a minute. Right. Okay. I would like to advise that following the meeting on the 25th of January, I had a meeting with Councillor Carroll regarding cemetery capacity. And I also made a presentation to Cabinet on behalf of the Communities Overview Committee regarding the committee's Shropshire Affordable Housing Allocation Policy and Scheme Working Group. The meeting with Councillor Carroll was a particular follow-up to discuss with him cemetery capacity. We had a very constructive meeting with Councillor Carroll on this, and I agreed with him that this is an ongoing matter which should come before the Communities Overview Committee on a fairly regular basis, because we have to be absolutely certain that we can provide enough burial capacity throughout the county. One of the issues that came up with Councillor Carroll was that of looking at cemetery capacity in the various dioceses. As you know, we have Hereford Diocese and Lichfield Diocese, and we've agreed that we need to try and communicate with them to ensure that they're happy that there is sufficient cemetery capacity in those cemeteries which fall under their particular purview. Moving on to the presentation to Cabinet regarding the Affordable Housing Allocation Policy and Scheme Working Group, I'm pleased to report to the committee that we had a good presentation. I think we were complimented by the leader on a very good report going forward, and that the Cabinet will be happy as and when, bearing in mind that this was a draft report that came to Cabinet, as and when the report becomes the substantive report, we are confident that it can go back to Cabinet and will be approved. So I think that's quite satisfactory. One of the reasons why we were particularly keen that this should go back up to Cabinet was because we feel that it's very important that people who are in need of housing and who are rather confused by the current affordable housing allocation policy should know that this piece of work is being done. The whole point of it was to try and simplify and make more logical some of the provisions within the policy. We believe that we've achieved that, and evidently Cabinet was happy to support us in that. So that was that. We have various items on the agenda. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Councillor Leslie Picton. When we get to the public rights of way issue, we will be talking to her about this. Now, the only thing I don't have here is a proper. Sorry, excuse me doing this. We're moving on to public rights of way now. And just by way of introduction on this, the reason that we're doing this is the committee had a good discussion about the public rights of way and was somewhat concerned to hear that the public rights of way team had limited income with which to halt or reverse the decline in accessibility of the rights of way network, and that the service was unable to keep the funds that it generated from its commercial activities, receiving less funding than it generated in income. And we felt that it was important that we should ask the Cabinet to explore the possibility of public rights of way keeping the income they generate within their service. We met with the portfolio holder, Councillor Leslie Picton, and Councillor Picton, as you're with us, would you like to maybe take this issue up and explain to the committee what we were talking about and really how we felt we should proceed on this?
Absolutely, thank you, Councillor Motley. Councillor Leslie Picton, Cabinet Member for Culture and Leisure, which includes public rights of way. I think it's no secret that for some time we have been exploring ways in which services across the whole of the Culture and Leisure team can look at maximising their income. We are constantly asking our staff to be act in a more commercial way, and yet it seems that in one way we're asking them to do something, but in other ways they're not able to reap the benefits. Councillor Motley and I had a very detailed discussion alongside one of the officers, Pete Bamford, who's in charge of rights of way. And I suppose my concern is that we have in the past been able to secure the income going forward, but as things get towards the end of the financial year, very often those monies are removed. My suggestion going forward, so as of the financial year 21-22, is that whilst some services would like to keep all their income and roll it over, I am particularly interested in the income that they actually achieve by operating some of the smaller contracts and giving them the opportunity to maximise the amount of work that they can do by using that income. So what I will be talking to the officers, the senior officers, about is actually allowing them to keep their earned income as opposed to all income. Perhaps baby steps is the best way that we take this forward. The other thing that I am constantly concerned about is the fact that there is no depreciation within the rights of way budget. And as you can imagine, members, there are lots of equipment that the teams use, some of it quite large equipment, and there's currently no depreciation against that. So in effect, every now and again, the team have to find some considerable amounts of money, which is very difficult from year in, year out budgets. If they were able to roll these monies forward, they could plan more effectively. So that's, in short, what I'll be asking my cabinet colleagues to support and the senior officers to put in place. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted me to cover, Councillor Motley.
Thank you, Councillor Picton. I think one of the other things that we identified when we were looking at this previously was, first of all, the fact that you are short of staff because you've lost staff through retirement. And obviously, the pandemic was tending to limit the capacity of officers to carry out necessary in-office work. The other issue that was raised was the fact that volunteers with the parish partnership groups obviously couldn't meet. They were unable to carry out maintenance and clearance during the pandemic. And one thing that we all highlighted here was very much the fact that due to the pandemic, there has been a vastly increased use of our parish paths and rights of way, and consequently, there's been quite a lot of deterioration in their condition, which has been very hard very hard to cope with, bearing in mind the fact that the volunteers on the whole haven't been able to meet and get cracking on doing anything about that. And obviously the lack of funds means that it's hard to bring the network into greater use. And I wonder if you could just explain to us a little bit about the fact that we did have some money for necessary capital works for bridges, but of course not all that money has come forward. And when it comes to bridges, you're talking about very different things, aren't you?
Yes, I mean, if I just cover a couple of the points that you've raised and then move on to bridges. So the parish paths partnerships obviously haven't been able to meet because of the COVID pandemic. I think to say that they are champing at the bit to get on with it is an understatement. Only last week I was at 2 parish councils on the same evening, thanks to the marvels of Zoom, and both of them asked when their parish partnerships could start back up again, and we sort of have discussed around the 29th of March, so we'll be looking at starting those then. I think, as you said, Councillor Motley, it's no secret that our paths, and in some cases paths that haven't had any walkers on them for years, have suddenly found increased use, which has meant that, you know, stiles and gates and things need to have some work done on them. And of course we have had quite a lot of rain this winter as well, so rain with lots of footprints does create some difficulty. So there is a fair amount of work that we need to catch up on. The other thing is that it gives me the opportunity also to say that many of the team across the whole of culture and leisure, but certainly in the great outdoors, have also been seconded to the community reassurance team. So that again has meant that there are less staff to be spread about. But I do have to say that the staff that have remained out there working have done some, really excellent work over the last 12 months in really difficult circumstances. The problems that I think we will be facing, and bridges actually falls into this category, is that if you don't have a plan and a maintenance plan, an ongoing maintenance plan, and certainly with things like bridges, where if they're bridges over water, then you're limited to when you can actually get in the water and do repair work, etc. If we don't have an ongoing maintenance plan, then one single failure of a bridge could be a significant amount of money. Where it's one thing looking at replacing a stile and a kissing gate, but replacing a bridge can be a very, very different matter. So again, if we can keep these monies rolling forward, and even in a capital sense, actually, so that it's slightly easier with the capital funds. I appreciate that we have got a significant amount of money that we can put towards a scheme of bridge repairs and maintenance. It is a difficult situation. We are not blessed with huge amounts of funds, but I will be again asking for monies to go back into the bridge budget so that we can do that work. I think the other thing to say is that at the moment we do only have one bridge engineer, and he's incredibly busy at the moment, so we need to look at supplementing that as well. Thank you, Councillor Motley.
That's very helpful, Councillor Picton. Thanks very much for that. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to raise or comments that they'd like to make to Councillor Picton at this point? I've just had a look on the chat function, which seems a little bit barren. But does anybody have anything that they'd like to say before I move on to the other bit of the discussion that we had on this? Tina Woodward, Councillor Woodward, please. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Leslie, could you clarify when you say they're going to actually potentially retain some of the money they earn, what type of figure are we looking at? What's the cut-off point for what they can actually hopefully retain for in-service?
Thank you, Councillor Woodward. I have yet to determine that. I mean, we're probably looking around £120,000 a year at the moment. My hope is that can be increased. Without seeming churlish, as I said before, we're asking staff to be more commercial and a bit entrepreneurial, but where's the incentive if they actually can't see the benefit of using that money further down the line? So at the moment, that earned income, and that can be anything from schools contracts to funny enough, going back to what you were talking about earlier on, graveyard maintenance, that sort of thing. But if we were able to increase the staff slightly, we'll be able to increase the income. So that's what I'm hopeful. What I suppose I would like from the council at the end of the day, especially with culture and leisure services, is to look at treating them more like commercial services. And there's a very interesting point that if you think about all the sort of contracts that the council is responsible for over a very wide area, it would be interesting to see how many contracts the council has with people cutting grass, and whether actually our own teams should be included in those, because I'm sure sometimes they're not. So when somebody's looking to say cut some grass around, let's say a sheltered accommodation complex, I do wonder actually if our staff get the chance to actually bid for those contracts. So that's another thing I'll be raising with Cabinet and with directors.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I think with me, you're knocking at an open door, because I think that's definitely the way to go. Yeah. We're trying to incentivise it. We're trying to make teams work well. Yeah. And this team does work well. There's no doubt about it. When they go out, they look for work. It's just that it then leaves us with a black hole, and I will name a name, which is Tim Simmons, who's an officer for this area, who's been very, very helpful. But I know his skill set is very valued in the areas of where we can pull money in. So we miss him, is what I'd say. Yeah. So that's a miss in the service on the statutory side that we have to do. So thank you, Leslie, very helpful.
Pleasure.
Okay, anybody else wants to comment? Ted Clark. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I won't keep things too long. Are we confident that we can retain the partnership individuals, all the volunteers that do operate on a regular?
Sorry, Councillor Clark, you broke up a little bit there. It must be the signal in Buncombe.
Now because of COVID.
I think what
Sorry,
Clark was saying, Ted.
I'm just interested in. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Clark.
Okay?
You do certainly have a problem with your line, I'm afraid. But I think what you were concerned about, if I'm right, was whether these voluntary groups were still together, as it were, and still prepared to undertake the work that they were doing before, and whether equally, I suppose, the public rights of way team would be able to support them in the way that they had been able to previously. Is that about right, Ted?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Sorry.
Very much so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. It's I think, as I said earlier on, the parish paths partnership, in the main are raring to go. I think the other thing is the team have supported them really well over the last 12 months, even though they've not been active on the ground. I know that the newsletters and the contact has been there. I have quite a few of them within my parish councils. I think there's also an opportunity for us going forward to make a plea for more volunteers. But again, as Councillor Motley said, that comes back to being able to support them. But the support is still there. As I said, hopefully, if we could increase the staff numbers, albeit even on short-term contracts, we will be able to offer increased support. But I think we should personally be taking this opportunity of all those people out there who've realised how wonderful our Rights of Way network is over the last 12 months and actually see if we can't get some more volunteers out of it.
Yep, I would entirely endorse that. Right, Councillor Parry, Viv.
Thank you. That's very reassuring.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Viv Parry.
Thank you, Viv Parry, Ludlow South. As you can realise, I've got 4 parishes on one side leading up into Hereford area, and my problem really is that my parishes work very hard to do lots of jobs. In fact, I've even had one of them. The chairman came out and dug a ditch for me because it was flooding the houses running across the road and flooding them. So, they do work hard, these parishes, to do things. And we appreciate the money we get off the council to do that. But I must honestly say that I get real jip off Hereford side telling me how bad our rights of way are. And not people not being who are good, really strong walkers. They're fine on the Hereford side. But when they get to our side, they can't get through the pathways. Everything's grown over, of course. And I know we've had the COVID, but I'm sorry, I'm talking about a few years now that it's been like this. I really get sick of the chairman of Hereford Council ringing me and telling me how bad it is for his walkers who come over or people that live on this side who are telling me the same thing. So we really need to sort of look at the really, how should I say, the dense country areas where you've got forests and different things, and do something about it. It really would help tremendously for me as a councillor not to have somebody telling me how bad we are from Hereford side.
Before I hand over to Councillor Picton, Viv, I wonder if I could ask you, do you actually have a parish paths partnership group operating in that particular area?
We do.
On your border with and what support?
Yes, they work together, both sides.
Do they ask for support from the Public Rights of Way team?
They have, but of course they know that how money's been cut back, and unfortunately they have got to the stage now. The parishes will come out and do it themselves. It takes such a long time for anything to be done.
Councillor Picton, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, a couple of things, Viv. I will forward you, if I can find it, the email that I received from my opposition number a couple of years back from Hereford, who wanted to know how we maintained our rights of way so well when theirs was so poor. So things, you know, I think sometimes we get used somewhat as members, Viv.
Well, I'm sorry, but he's the chairman of Hereford, and he really is annoyed. Not just at the, but also our highways as well.
Well, it's not my, that's not my bag. But as far as the rights of way goes, I think firstly I would say that your parish paths partnerships, you know, need to make sure that they have continued support from our rights of way team. And I'll go back to, and you know, it's no secret, you know, monies have been removed from the rights of way budget. I'm fighting tooth and nail to make sure that doesn't happen again. But I think keeping that communication with those parish paths partnerships is really vital, and also making sure that you have the contact with your local area technician, because that's very important as well. So they are absolutely aware of where the issues are.
Yes, I do ring them, Leslie. Any trees or anything that come down, or pathways or stiles that have broken down,
Sure.
you know, I mean, so, you know, but we have got some new bridges that people are wanting. So where is the money going to come for that as well?
Well, I'll be making a plea for some capital for bridges, as I said earlier on.
Right.
Yeah, I think we did cover that.
Well, thank you very much. Anyway.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm sorry, it's Les.
Yes, Councillor Winwood.
Do apologise. I'm having trouble with the chat function, but I wonder
All
if
right.
I could just say something.
Yes, you may indeed.
It's so nice to hear Leslie mentioning the how important that the countryside paths on, and especially during this pandemic, how people have come out and found it so essential with their health, and that the use of course, has caused lots of muddy and unfortunately situations where it'll probably take a little bit of cash to put right, but delighted to see that perhaps this has awakened the public and perhaps ourselves, that how important this countryside and the pathways are to our general health. And I think the more money that the officers that do accrue this money can spend, and they know how best, and the professionals know how best to spend it. So I'm enlightened and heartened by what Leslie said, and I agree with Tina that it's a vital part of our county. This network is a vital part of our county, and my goodness, aren't we seeing it at the moment?
Thank you very much, Councillor Winwood, for that very positive comment. I think, as I have no more questions, I'm going to wrap this up. But what I wanted particularly to say and to update members on was the fact that you will recall that at the last meeting we were very concerned about this this fundamental shortfall in the rights of way services funding, such that we were going to take this up to Cabinet, and we were hoping that we would be able to get it to Cabinet before the pre-election period kicked in. And unfortunately, we've been told that due to the tightness of the programme, we are unable to do that. But I would like to ask this committee's permission to actually place this onto a future Cabinet agenda as an issue for the Communities Overview Committee post-election, because I do think it's very important that this doesn't get lost just because we're moving from one administration to the next. It is a very important issue. It's becoming more and more important. Who knows whether we are going to be struck by by yet another wave of this pandemic, and once again our public rights of way are going to be thrown into sharp relief, because they're going to be getting more and more use again. Not only that, but I think we can be fairly confident that there will be a lot of people undertaking staycations over this summer period, and that too is going to put pressure on further pressure on the rights of way network. So this is a very important, and it's a live issue, and I would like your permission, please, to put this onto a future Cabinet agenda for consideration. So is everybody happy with that approach, please? Could I have a seconder, please?
Seconded,
I'm
Chairman.
happy to second.
Thank you.
Ted Clark.
Thank you. Everybody happy with that?
Yep.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, in which case, could I thank Councillor Picton very much for giving us so much of her extremely busy time. And I hope she's reassured that we are taking this issue very seriously.
I am. Thank you, Chair. And if it's all right with you, I will stay and listen to the issue, to the matter of libraries as well.
Good. Okay. Thank you. You're very welcome to do that. Can we move on then? Can we have the next item, which is rural transport? Now, this is an ongoing one for us, and it's quite appropriate that we bring this forward to this meeting, I think. You will recall that way back in 2018, the Communities Overview Committee looked at the matter of community transport services and noted that we were in a fairly precarious situation at that time. And equally at that time, the community transport associations, I think you'll recall, were at risk of increased regulation. There was a particular regulation which they were worried about following a European Court ruling, which could have rendered many of the community transport groups unviable because they just simply wouldn't have fitted into any of the criteria. Yes, who's that?
I do apologise, it's Les. I've just realised I have an interest here and I do apologise. I'm a trustee of the Bridge Northern District Transport Group.
Okay, could we have a ruling, please, Clerk, as to whether that is a matter involving a pecuniary interest and whether we should ask Councillor Winwood to withdraw on this?
Chair, if I might intervene, it's Daniel Webb here, a Review
Yes.
Scrutiny Officer.
Thank you.
I think unless Councillor Woodward profits from that and basically draws an income or some sort of income from that role, then it's not a pecuniary interest. So he's more than happy to stay for the meeting should he wish to.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Daniel. That's very helpful. So we didn't in the end produce a final report for this particular task and finish group that we set up to look at community transport. But we were very concerned about the fact that particularly the community transport groups had a very important role to play in delivering transport to the rural areas, and they couldn't. But despite the importance of the role, they can't be relied upon to provide a comprehensive service, particularly in rural areas, because there are not enough of them, and they do have certain constraints upon the way they work, not least that a lot of them have to rely on volunteer drivers. Also, you will recall that we were very concerned about the decline in use of the scheduled bus services and increasing dependence on subsidies to provide those services, and the subsidies seem to be becoming more and more expensive, and resulting in a situation where per passenger subsidies sometimes exceeded the cost of providing taxis for those passengers. So the whole thing has got rather out of kilter. Shropshire Council, meanwhile, has been looking very hard at this and recognises the need to change how it provides public transport, particularly in the rural areas. And the officers who were attending the meeting, hopefully we're going to hear from James Willocks at least. And if James is here, which I hope he is, we're hoping that he might be able to give us some ideas about how we actually do rural transport in the future. So James, are you around?
I am, Chair. Thank you for having me.
Good. No, not at all. It's a great pleasure. I wonder if I could turn over to you now, James, because just a few weeks ago we had a very good and in-depth discussion with James Willocks about how on earth we improve particularly rural transport and the connections between rural transport and, as it were, the main transport links, such as railway stations and bus and the main subsidised bus services. And James has come up with all sorts of ideas, and he's now going to give us a presentation on them, which I hope you will find enlightening, because I certainly did when I saw it first. So James, please, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm now going to press the share button so that we can hopefully all see the presentation. So if perhaps Daniel could tell me when we can see it, that'd be super.
Yeah, I've got it.
Have you got it?
Yeah.
Great. So unfortunately, as you do these, as we all know, you all disappear, so I can't see any hands or anything. So, you know, obviously at the end, if there's anybody who wants to ask me any questions, I'll take the presentation off so I can see you all again.
All right, James, I'll tell you what, I will ask everybody, please, if you've got questions for James, please put them in the chat function and then we can pick them up from there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chair. I really appreciate that. So, Chair, it's rather apt today, and I'd like to say that we timed this perfectly, but you'll probably see that the national bus strategy has been announced by the government today, by the Prime Minister, and I think that really links in to some of the things that we're going to talk about now. So the first element is really a few slides just setting the scene, then a few slides talking about the impact of the pandemic, as we all know, on lots and lots of businesses countrywide has been significant, and then some indicative ideas about what we can actually do to help transform public transport. I think those will dovetail in nicely when I summarise at the end and talk about some of the funding mechanisms that may come out of the government's announcements this morning around the national bus strategy. So off we go. So I thought this slide at the very beginning sort of demonstrates really what we've put there, the challenge. So those are all the addresses within our lovely county, and obviously the issue straight away is there's areas of some density, but they're quite low in urban terms. So we've obviously got Shrewsbury as our centre, but as you can see, there's almost an address in every single corner, almost square kilometre of Shropshire. So that's the challenge that we all know that we face with such a significantly large rural authority, and as in many service areas, passenger transport is one of those, and it's significant when we think that the travel times for people on buses can be well over an hour, and obviously one of the key things we want people to do is transfer to buses in many occasions. But obviously we've got to start thinking, well, how can we do that when travel times are so significant? As I said at the beginning, setting the scene a little bit here. So in the county, all the bus services, we subsidise 45 of them. There's 22 that are commercial. So 2/3, it'd be fair enough to say, are subsidised by ourselves. Now, in a more urban area where there's probably enormous amounts of public transport, it would be completely the opposite. So you would probably have 90% commercial services and 10% subsidised in those urban areas. And I think it's at that point, which we'll perhaps talk about the BAS strategy in a moment or two, where a lot of legislation and actually funding goes towards urban transport. So then the challenge is for us all is how do we convert urban transport ideas into rural transport? That, of course, is the challenge that we all face and allude to a little bit later in my presentation. So again, quick facts, just to build up to where we're going. Out of all the routes we subsidise, there's some major players in that. Arriva, as you'd probably all expect, they're in the top right at 67%. Lakeside, who have come more and more into public transport and have done a great job as well. They're certainly, those numbers have increased with subsidised services and a commercial service from them in recent years. We've got Tannet Valley, Bennett's Travel to do town services for us, Minsley Motors, and it won't be the first time we mention community transport. Shrewsbury Dial-A-Ride obviously do a lot of essential services for those vulnerable people that live in and around Shrewsbury, as do all the community groups. So again, similar slide, that's just a summary of the sort of the operator split when it comes to commercial services. Again, very similar number, as you can see, for Arriva, the biggest player here by a long way when it comes to commercial services. And Minsley Motors indeed run commercial services down to Councillor Parry's area, a vital link between Shrewsbury and Ludlow, and other services indeed out to Bishop's Castle, Minsley and Ponsbury. So again, Arriva dominate that area, as you would expect, and then we've got some smaller operators in the commercial market. And just so we know, the difference between subsidised and commercial, subsidised are the ones where the council have picked up subsidy and they pay an annual subsidy for the operator, because commercial operators have decided that there isn't a commercial profit to be made from fares alone, so the council support them. This screen demonstrates those routes really we're talking about, where the operator has said, well, we think, this is all pre-pandemic, that we can make a commercial profit out of revenues on bus, and those represent the 20 odd routes that I showed you at the beginning. We mentioned the chair kindly mentioned community transport earlier, and the in-depth study we took into that back in 2018, I think it was. And this was a slide that we've presented today, that they brought about these facts from a consultant that looked at the consortium of community transport operators. So there's a consortium, they've all their own individual bodies, but there's also a consortium that they come together and share our ideas and best practice, which is fantastic. And we sit on that as an on-board member to help advise and talk about opportunities. But these are some of the key facts that came out of that I thought were really interesting to share with you. 3,600 members in that year, 300,000 miles. They do a fantastic service, and people that may have absolutely no alternative to get out, they haven't got their own car, public transport, as we'll demonstrate in a minute, doesn't really necessarily meet their needs, or there isn't a service there for them. So these people really do, these community groups provide an absolute lifeline. And today really we're talking about how can we coordinate better, perhaps with community transport, with the public transport element. And then in the colours there above, those are just some facts about some of the value that the community sector have identified that they bring to the wider community. And where it says in red, health and social care value, that's where it's been estimated by being able to help people stay in their homes for longer because you're able to bring services to them, or you're able to take them to services. That means they don't necessarily have to go into potentially residential care, etc. I also thought in the pale blue that was interesting, that for every £1 invested in the community transport operation, you see £12 of social value, because they do more than just take somebody from A to B. There's as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of effort and care and understanding that goes into what they do. So they're a really important part of the rural transport offering in Shropshire. Now we're probably starting to go into now the pandemic impact. So the green figures are this is for subsidised services. So those 45 routes that I showed you in one of the first slides at the beginning. So passenger numbers have obviously were 1.2 million and are now at 366,000. As you can imagine, we all know the capacity of public transport has been reduced in half anyway, because for social distancing since March of last year. And the emphasis obviously has been on public transport in this period. Understandably, is to only use public transport where it's necessary, unless you've got alternative means. But for many, public transport is their only option, so they continue to use it. And this slide is, as the chair will know, I went to a Rural Services Network meeting a few weeks ago, really interesting about rural transport and the way ahead. Also, there's been a recent study undertaken by the LGA, the Local Government Association, about rural transport and the challenges. So I've picked from that, and also some of our own words and from other elements of the industry, the challenges and the key words that perhaps help us build on what the impact of the pandemic has been for transport, and perhaps also demonstrates visually the gravitas of the impact on transport. So the top left there in red, the entire bus industry it became unviable overnight, hence the huge support that we've had from the Department for Transport across the country. So in the other red box, it says services have only survived, and they have due to the council. So the council were instructed by the government to pay supplier relief, in other words, to pay at pre-COVID levels on their services. But also we received funding from the Department for Transport to make up for the loss in fares that those operators have experienced in the reduction in capacity and public transport, people being advised not to use it unless they have to. And that circa is around about £1.3 million that we've received so far as a council in fare losses. The councils across the country, it's estimated to be up to £1 billion. And then there's payments directly from the DFT to commercial operators that we don't get involved in. So estimates are well in excess of £1 billion, if not two. So you can imagine that that's essentially loss in fare revenue. So overnight, virtually, the government and the local councils are subsidising well over £1 billion, and I think towards the higher end of getting towards £2 billion worth of loss in fares, so it's massive. The orange is really about thoughts about how we come out of this and how we build back better, which is obviously the ambition here. It's not necessarily just to go back to where we were before, even if we could click our fingers and the horrid pandemic disappeared. I think we all know, and the chair explained that at the beginning, the bus industry has been in decline for some time, and certainly in rural areas bus numbers of passengers has reduced. So there was always something we needed to do, and we always had in mind that we had to think about a transport strategy and really a focus on rural communities. Obviously, it makes common sense that we want to make sure that public money is spent in targeting the outcomes that we need, and we need to understand what we think those outcomes are, and be ambitious, because if we are going to build back better than before, then we do need to be ambitious and deliver services to non-bus users that attract them to it. So we need to be very conscious of people that use buses and how essential they are, but we also need to make that offer attractive to the non-bus user. And the green is a statement from the LGA, as you can see, that the councils are going to play a pivotal role, and that's where I mentioned probably go back to the national bus strategy mentioned today. That is very much about collaboration between local government partners, but also between the bus industry and local government. So to unlock that funding, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, the £3 billion worth of funding, a lot of it is focusing on what they call enhanced partnerships, where you go into a partnership with the operator, the local government, the council. We would perhaps commit to improve infrastructure. They would potentially look to improve the delivery of the services, so better frequencies, fares, etc. Or you look at franchising, and franchising is probably, in my terminology, the pre-1985 Transport Act, which is where the council or local government set more of the agenda about what the public transport offer looks like, rather than you have a commercial environment and then those services aren't commercially viable. The council then has to look at whether it picks them up. It actually means that you take more of an holistic view to it and you say, well, what is the better transport system for Shropshire? Now, there'll have to be lots of work and understanding to see which way we go with that and which way the council wants to, and cabinet, of course, and we need to put all that information before them, and both of them absolutely have their merits, but they are key to unlocking that part of that £3 billion for Shropshire. So we will have to look at that in earnest. Key error, I went back the wrong way. So I mentioned that was the first of a few slides. We're really setting the scene, then the impact of the pandemic, and then the focus on that we're all talking about now is building back better. So again, not building back to what it was. We think we can build back better and have a better public transport offer, especially for rural communities in Shropshire, who, as you see as we go through this, sometimes haven't even got the option of a bus service, let alone a frequent one. Now, first of all, I'll put up. Oh, apologies. That's you lost my slides. Has it just popped off? I do apologise. Oh, there it is. Sorry, it's my screen. I must have pressed the button. So that's just an example of why we think how we're going to build back better. But this is for Shrewsbury. So this isn't a rural transport slide. There's just one to show we're thinking about things differently. This is about how we could integrate transport in Shrewsbury itself with the park and rides to actually provide more frequent services for everybody. So it's just a case in point about how we can potentially build back better than we were before. The ideas we're having, and these are purely indicative, are around creating something called Rural Connect. And I think it says a lot of it in this green text at the top. That the challenge is that for many residents in Shropshire, vast rural areas, they have no local transport at all. So they are absolutely reliant on the community transport element that I mentioned earlier. But the challenge exists beyond that. Is how do young people get to work? How do young people get to leisure activities? How do older people get to leisure activities? All of us. And how do all of us make it to medical appointments or college? And then, of course, it's the affordability. So there's lots of what they call levers for change for moving people into public transport. And you've really got to have a mix of all of them. So things like high frequency, so that you get a bus when you want it. The fares are reasonable and when comparing it to the cost of a car. And that might sound a little strange, but for some people that want better, more convenience and more frequency, they will turn to the car even if it's a little more costly. So we've got to think about the offer that we provide. What are the levers to get people to actually use public transport? And these again, is just some thoughts from us, and this is all purely indicative at this stage, around what do we need to create here to help rural Shropshire have better connectivity and move to the places it wants to, but also move in a way that's climate change friendly, as I would call it. So things along the lines of what of our population numbers? We know we have a concessionary pass scheme nationally, but how can we help young people? How can we help people get to work? Can we, for example, improve our interurban services? So what I call by those are the routes that travel, say, for example, between Bridgnorth and Shrewsbury. Can they operate at a better frequency? And could we actually, rather than divert them off route, bring people on a demand responsive level to connection hubs so that they can jump on the service in Much Wenlock, for example, and be expressed into Shrewsbury at times that are convenient for them? And I think that's one of the keys. Public transport hasn't really changed a lot. When you go to a lot of seminars and you talk to the Rural Services Network, lots of people in the industry, since 1985, Transport Act, and probably that was implemented in 86, lots of bus routes, and I'm sure lots of the members' residents will say they've been as they are for many years. So it is now a time to say, well, actually, where do people want to go to, rather than actually the bus decides for them in many ways where they're going. So as an initial starter, what we've looked at is if we could have some trial areas where we could access funding, but work with the communities to come up with take almost a modular approach to building back better services, whether they be on demand or improving the frequency of interurban services that I mentioned earlier. Could we actually have a scenario where we had, and these are just 4 indicative examples, that actually could then be replicated elsewhere in Shropshire? Because what we realised after looking at this for a certain period of time is we could come up with some very clever bespoke arrangements that would just absolutely suit that area. But then we'd have to do that work all over again for another area. Now, everything's always got to have a local adjustment for it. Absolutely appreciate that, because even in Shropshire, every area can be different. But if, for example, as I go through these 4 scenarios or proposals, is we thought, could they be applied somewhere else? If they could only be applied in one place, we discounted them. They could still be done, but for this basis, we thought, well, if we had 4 trial areas and we had the funding, I think a lot of these could be self-funding by scaling the public transport offer in those communities, but also looking at funding through this national bus strategy that I alluded to today that was announced. Could we then create them in multiple places? So if you just bear with me, I'll take you through a few of the scenarios. So these are loosely based on areas, but the idea here is they're purely indicative. So it could be any 4 areas in the county. So for this example, the interurban example, is that currently at the moment you've got an interurban bus service that travels from one town to another, and it takes well in excess of an hour. So what you tend to find is that people use it in the peak that have to use it, so people who need to go to work, and school children and college children, but actually it doesn't meet needs of lots of other people. So you don't see any growth on that route probably in 15 years, at least 10. But at the same time, it's competing with the rail network. And the reason that people don't use the rail network is probably cost, that concessionary pass holders get it free, obviously, on public transport, on buses it is, but they don't get it necessarily free on rail. But there's an opportunity. So could we connect residents to the fast and frequent rail services? You'll see the words in the grey between those 3 towns. So bringing people in from the green, more rural hinterland into those towns A, B and C, so they can actually, if they're closer to the town, take them directly in, but actually if they're closer to town B, take them in so that they can actually connect with rail. Clearly, there's got to be some negotiation with the rail operators around the fares. But in the National Bus Strategy, it doesn't say anything about not negotiating the fare rates. It talks about fare rates across all of public transport. So that actually then you've got a scenario where we can actually use the bus resources to bring people in from the rural areas into the towns, into the market towns, to access services there, or actually for greater connection using the rail line to get into the major towns if there, for example, is a hospital there, or there's a major service that they need to access that isn't available in their local community. But lots of local communities do have some of the facilities that they need. So it might be that they're satisfied, but you've got a fast, frequent rail service that may take you 20 minutes to get in rather than 50 minutes on a bus. But also at the same time, it satisfies the needs of the rural people by actually getting to them rather than getting within a mile of them. So they actually can have those links, those essential services. So that's about the utilising rail more and that connectivity that the chair mentioned in the morning, but earlier on. But it's also key for us, especially in these times, links to medical practices. We know that hospital and medical are one of the biggest reasons for people travelling. So having accessibility to those is really important. So that's one example that we can have. And we think that if that was potential, we chose a trial area, we could replicate that in a number of different locations in Shropshire. So we move on to the next one. This is what we call a flexible bus network. So this is an example of a town service. So this could be a town service in any event of a major towns: Oswestry, Market Drayton, Ellesmere, Whitchurch, Ludlow. The idea being is where there's demand, we actually create a fixed route, as you have now, which is the blue route, as you can see on there, but with better connectivity to the railway station. Because if we are going to think about public transport holistically, there's got to be that connectivity. So we do that. Again, we link into the medical practices. But we look at the way that it's subsidised and say, well, actually, the green elements, so the sort of dotted or hashed green elements, they're less frequented at the moment. There's potential for them to be fixed if we can get more people on that route. So actually operate that as a flexible service, so you can book it. And again, I'll probably go back to the National Bus Strategy. There's some rural funding available for that very thing, which is about booking flexible bus services that you can book online for. Book through an app or book through any interface. So that's quite interesting. But it gives you the flexibility there. So where the number of people are and the majority, it's a fixed bus, so it comes every half an hour, every 20 minutes at the preordained times. But the green one is, if you want to travel on that route, then you book to go on it, and essentially it only travels where it needs to go. So again, it's only in use when it needs to be. And there's examples of both of these, all four of these around the country, where they work really well. This was another interesting challenge for us, where we've got a number of, obviously, neighbouring authorities, but it does have to be a neighbouring authority. This could be between Shropshire towns. Is where the blue line's going to Town A. They're not served at all by regular bus service, which I'm sure a number of the members will on the call today will have similar problems. So they might be twice a week, it might be 3 times a day. Now that's not going to encourage business people, young people, or anybody that wants to travel flexibly. So how do we meet that challenge? And again, there's a really good rail service in there. So the proposal there is to have those residents that are living in the green areas, so the more rural areas, again, that they haven't even got the option of the irregular service. They've got to get to it in the first place. They can use the Rural Connect, so the bookable service, to actually meet the peak buses running through the blue area. And the ambition would be those high frequency routes that on the blue routes would go from once or twice a day. So they need to be travelling at relatively frequent times. So we're not suggesting in rural areas we're going to have buses every 20 minutes. But what the ambition would be to have one hourly, so that we can actually connect with it and bring people from those rural areas to a major hub, so they can travel into the major town. And again, what that does is we've learned our lessons from having a demand responsive service you probably all remember, called Shropshire Link, back probably now, good grief, 10, 11 years ago. And the problem with that, and it's when we talk to other colleagues in other authorities, it's the same problem they experienced, is it was it's from anywhere to anywhere. And the problem with that is that it became extremely expensive because you're having long journeys out of area, and at the same time it was almost competing with our own public transport services that were underused. You're doing it this way by bringing them into the public transport routes. We actually strengthen them and actually give them a better chance of being commercially viable than they would have been if we just leave them on those 2 or 3 day a week services, and the rural people that potentially could use it don't use it because they can't access it. So the fourth example is again a really interesting one, where we have a fairly reasonable frequency between town A and town B, but it only goes 2 or 3 days a week. 2 days a week it goes from town B to town C. So if you're really living on a village in the green, so village, I hope you can see it, village M or village L, you're going to be planning your journeys for a Monday, Wednesday and a Friday. But what happens when you want to go on a Tuesday or Thursday, especially in the times we live in where working habits change, so home working comes in, and actually you want much greater flexibility to travel. So, and the subsidy on that particular service is really high because bus numbers of travelling numbers have dropped. Obviously it's dropped even further through the pandemic. So again, we looked at that and said, well, actually what we can do with the subsidy there is actually provide a much better frequency, so a good hourly frequency every day, Monday to Saturday, between town B and A and B and C. And then for those people living in the rural areas, we either give them a direct service if they're nearer to town A or C or B, or if they're further away, we give them a direct link to the high frequency blue route. Key there is obviously you've got to make sure that they actually meet up the bus and the sort of the on-demand service, but the technology is there now to ensure you do that. And having one bus operator do them both would make sense, so they can actually manage that. And then there's also the connectivity for the railway service. So there's a really good railhead there, but actually the options for anybody living in that green area to get there by bus are impossible. You can only go Monday, Wednesday and Friday, which is great if you work or even for leisure purposes. But at no point does it actually meet up with the times of any of the trains. So key for us there is the bottom of the grey quadrant on the left, is to say coordinate it. So we need to coordinate those buses and the demand responsive rural connect to actually get to that railhead so that it can meet people coming off the train. So in many cases, it's all very well having a railway station, but if nothing links with it, guess what? Everybody's going to have to drive there. And if they haven't got a car, it makes it so much more challenging. These are some of the core principles. As again, these are all graphs that we're thinking through. I'm sure it'll expand over the next few weeks and months. It certainly has over the time that we've been doing it. So the core principles of Rural Connect that links you into those bus services, or takes you directly to the medical practice, or takes you to the railhead. You need to be able to put them and allocate them a space on the vehicle so they know they've got it. Excuse me, I do apologise. I'm not sure in the interim how keen people are going to be about standing on public transport. I think that's being reflected in rail usage at the moment. So I think having a seat and a space for everybody will be important, and having a high quality vehicle. Obviously, clearly going to medical practice and hospitals is going to be paramount moving forward, and we've really engaged and collaborating with our health colleagues through the pandemic and helping with transport. And we can really see how the benefits of helping people get to those appointments is going to be key going forwards. And the other obviously element is trying to get people to their nearest stop and their chosen service. But in arriving in time for relevant departures, and I said that about rail once or twice, or even in connectivity with other buses. If we really want to take this sort of holistic approach to public transport, then we have to make sure it all connects. Otherwise, it's all very well having a bus service that goes almost close to your house, but it actually doesn't connect to where you're going. It almost becomes a little bit pointless. So the Rural Connect side of it, the sort of minibus, is going away from the traditional sort of community transport image of a bus to actually what a bus, a lot of people imagine it looks like. It would be fairly high frequency, on demand, and of course within it you would make sure that it had all the components in there that would attract people to the service. So good seating. This day and age is going to have Wi-Fi, electric charging points, all of that, and those sort of buses do operate throughout the country, and they work really well. but where they work really well, they've got to have a lot of the ingredients that we're just about to talk about. We're thinking about, at the same time, what does Rural Connect mean to, what can it mean to the people of Shropshire? Providing a flexible, responsive rural transport service, linking communities, which is obviously really key, whilst connecting residents to frequent bus and rail. So it's connecting people within Shropshire, but then also giving them the ability to travel further afield should they wish to. So there's, I think we mentioned earlier in the meeting about people's staycations. You want to be able to travel. If we're going to ask people to leave their car behind, or perhaps think about having in the interim one car rather than two, then it can't just be about work and college that we're thinking about. It's got to be leisure activities as well, and wider travel throughout the United Kingdom. And just in summary, so I don't waffle on too much, is next stages for us really are going from left to right at the top, identify the various models. So we've come up with 4, there could be 6 or 7, and then look at what actually the ones that we would like to do and understand, build that with those communities so they actually, it's their service, it's not ours. Yes, we've got to have some of the vision and the idea, but it's got to be what those communities want. Otherwise, it's very good, and my terminology, to have a very pretty train set that nobody uses. Great from a design perspective, but what use is it if people don't want it? Understand funding requirements. So we think a lot of this could be done by re-looking at the way we fund public transport, but also back to the national bus strategy, which we knew was on the way, but has been announced today. I think there's some really good potential for some of these trials or these models, excuse me, again, to be funded through that avenue. I think you can see that we've done a lot of work to try and understand the impact of the pandemic, but I think there's a lot of work to be done nationally as well as locally to understand what are the changing travel habits. So that could be from, we all know about working from home, but people's leisure activities and the way they spend the time, I'm sure, will change. Public transport, climate change. Public transport is in all its forms, so that'd be the private car, public transport, will have huge impact on climate change. So if we can get it right, we can really strive towards where we want to get to with that. So it's things like electric buses, again, mentioned in the National Bus Strategy, and we've had on trial ourselves. Hybrid vehicles, but hydrogen as well. Mustn't ignore hydrogen for rural counties, because electric buses aren't necessarily the solution. Hydrogen could be for a huge rural county like ours. Supporting funding from the DFT, identify the pilot areas from the sort of models we've created, create some timescales. We've already looked at best practice elsewhere in the country, so that's how we're trying to build our models. Huge part of building it. It's got to be built with the community and the stakeholders, members, to make it work. As I said, this isn't what we don't want this to be a pretty train set that looks good as from the designer's perspective but doesn't work. And then things like cabinet approval, obviously, paramount at the end, and through scrutiny in that process. And it's probably useful, Chair. That's the last slide. If I just mention now what the National Bus Strategy, a few key comments from that, if that's helpful. There's a few things that have come out from that will be perhaps of interest to members. So they've announced that obviously the National Bus Strategy, £3 billion. There'll be a new second headquarters for the DFT in Birmingham, so a lot closer to us for that relationship. 4,000 new zero emission buses. So again, back to what I said about, could be hydrogen, could be electric, could be other alternative fuels, but 4,000, that's huge. 20 million separate budget for rural mobility, which I think some of these early models that we're creating could attract that funding, and we've already bid into some of the funding models for the DFT, and indeed taken one of them to the Minister, which was well received. So we'd like to adapt perhaps potentially those. Better access for disabled people. But what's really interesting is integrated service, integrated ticketing and modern payments method. So they're really interested in having a one ticket approach. So you buy a ticket for a bus, and then the same ticket will take you across on rail, but also there's an emphasis on lower fares. I think you will know from anybody that uses public transport in Shropshire, concessionary fare holder off-peak, then you get that for free. But sometimes it's an absolute barrier for younger people or for anyone using public transport, is the cost of it if you weigh it up over a week or a working month. So we're really pleased to see that that they've acknowledged that fares need to be looked at, and I think it's really important for us when we're trying to change and develop rural transport. But that's me, Chair. Hopefully I haven't gone on too much, and that's all hopefully useful.
James, that is very, very useful, I have to say. I'm conscious of the fact that that people will want to ask questions, but before I open it up for discussion, there were just a few points that particularly struck me. The first was the obvious advantage about linking up with what is already there, if you see what I mean, in terms of, it has long seemed completely peculiar to me that we don't have a system where our current bus services actually call in at the railway stations in order to drop passengers off. They do in some towns, but they don't do in others. And that just seems to me to be, something of a waste of resource, really. The rural transport issue is obviously of particular interest to me because I'm a rural member myself. It was a source of great regret that the attempt that we made way back at the start of Unitary with the Shropshire, the original all-round Shropshire minibus service, was that we couldn't make it work. And it just simply didn't. We thought, I think, that it was going to be simpler than it turned out to be. So I think we are very conscious of the fact that we've got quite a lot of different bits in this jigsaw, which have all got to somehow be matched up, but that there is existing infrastructure which we need to be making much better use of. I'm very excited about the idea of new, much more climate change friendly vehicles to be used, and also I think it's terribly important that we do make those connections, particularly with an increasingly elderly population, of enabling people to go to medical appointments and actually to be able to get back again, because this has been one of the greatest problems that we've had to put up with over the years, is that you may be able to get a bus to take you, for example, to an appointment at one of our big hospitals, but you haven't got a chance of getting back the same day, which seems completely ludicrous, doesn't it, when you put it like that? So we are talking about, this is very ambitious stuff, and I think the first thing that I would like to ask you is, how long do you think we will need before we can actually roll this out, assuming that we get our bits of the jigsaw in place?
I think a lot of it is, to be honest, Chair, is making sure that we understand people's travel demands and habits going forwards. So it's as we come out of the pandemic, it's going to be really important for us to start making those consultations and understanding where we're going. But at the same time, knowing that we've got to be really sharp on the ball here to access DFT funding. Mm-hmm. So we've got to start drawing up models this year to get out to access those, and I think it's about choosing the right areas that members would like us to look at based on some of the designs we've come up with. But certainly this year you'd want to be, we'd love to see 4 of those trial areas underway.
That's very good, because I think one of the problem about pronouncements like this on transport from the DFT in the past, with all due respect to them, has been that very often they have been a far greater benefit to the urban areas than they have been to the rural areas. So this is a case of trying to rebalance the whole issue of public transport in large authority areas such as our own, I think. I'm going to go on down to Nigel Hartin now, please, because I really must stop hogging this. Nigel, please, if you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Nigel Hartin from Clon Division. Thanks, James. That's been a very good presentation, and very lots of good thought has obviously gone into this, and some hopefully some real good can come out of it. What concerns me, I suppose, I'm well aware of how well it seemed to work, the old Shropshire link we used to have 10 years ago used to work, but you know, for the reasons that you've already explained, it was very expensive, and we couldn't maintain it. And Cecilia's also mentioned that, and it's this cost aspect really, in terms of, you've also talked to other areas that have got similar iterations of this in part or in one way or another already in place. And they might have an idea of what the sort of the cost implications are. And you mentioned that, I think absolutely it's going to be key, is DFT funding for this. Do we have any indication of the level of budget of grant funding that the DFT may be able to have available at this stage, or do we just not yet know?
Is that okay to answer, Chair? So it's essentially the funding to now today is 3 billion, but what it hasn't said, Councillor Harting, is for which elements that applies. So what is the split? But certainly what is quite clear, I think, from early on looking at the legislation that's going to come through, or certainly the guidance, is it's got to be something like this, packages for improvements, rather than someone saying we want 13 buses or we want 5 buses. It's got to be a more holistic approach to it. So fare rates, frequencies, access to those to rural communities, a climate change benefit. And I think that you said earlier, Councillor Harden, about Shropshire Link. I think the challenge with that was it was, and this is again talking to colleagues in other local authorities, why things work and they don't. A lot of it was based, it was from anywhere to anywhere. There could have been a better structure to it. And I think with one or two of the models we suggested, that structure's there. So it takes you from point A to point B, C or D. If you want to go to point E, it takes you to a connection point. And that's where they tend to work, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. Vivian Parry next. Councillor Parry.
Yeah, Viv Parry, Ludlow South. Thank you, James. You know, I've been asking you for a bit more joined up trains and buses for a long time. I think this is absolutely fabulous, actually. What a wonderful idea. I've often wondered, actually, when I've gone down to London to catch the plane, you always get on trains, then buses, and then more buses, and it gets you to where you want to go. Why we haven't used this before, the only thing I would like to ask is, in Ludlow, we need a better parking area that is just for people that are going to get on the train. We need to, what we've got at the moment by our train place is just too small, and it needs to also have that ticketing with the price and everything of what we're going to get. But the new idea of a hub when we get to Shrewsbury to get on a very small bus to get where we're going is absolutely fantastic. So I'm really pleased about it. I'm sorry I missed the middle a little bit because my phone rang and it keeps going off when my phone rings. But thank you so much for working hard on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to ask James questions? Take advantage of him whilst he's here, please. Tina Woodward.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, James, as well. Very good presentation. What I would say is I've got Claverley in my division and they have no bus service whatsoever, none. And they are a decent sized settlement. And, you know, we have an elderly population, but you've also alluded to the youth as well, because the way the buses run in Arveley, which is also part of the division that luckily does have a service, we have nothing at night. And I think it's really sad because it's costly for parents to buy cars or children to save for cars, young adults, I should say, to save for cars. And that's difficult because they're not experiencing the outside world and the opportunities that they could have because they're stuck here unless somebody takes them backwards and forwards. Well, part of growing up is actually that independence. And I think it's recognised in what you're saying. Here we have what I'd call cross-subsidised bus, which is the 297. Now, how would that fit in? I don't know. We have the trains at Telford and we have trains at Kidderminster. But what I would say is Switzerland, they have a service that has been going for years that runs like clockwork, and I mean clockwork. If you're on a bus, it arrives, you have time to get from your bus to get to your train and it leaves. You look at the clock, it says it leaves then, and I remember being apologised to because one left 1 minute late. The train left 1 minute late. Now, it's all of it tying it together, and I think in principle this is great, and I look forward to it working, and I think there will be savings, but it's those initial costs and how smart we are at grabbing in that money. So I think we need to really work on that, which you obviously are, but it's the smart work that goes behind it. But that's only my opinion, but I'm heartened by what I'm hearing.
James, do you want to come back on that?
No, thank you, Councillor Wood, but absolutely, cleverly. I think those are the sort of areas we've got to look at. That I said we've got areas with infrequent bus services. We've got people who've got to get to the infrequent bus services because they haven't got anything. So I think that's really important. And I think the Switzerland model, and it happens elsewhere in this country, in Europe, it can work. We've just got to look at it a little bit more holistically, and we need to start small in that sense and say, how can we bring all those bus services in that area to meet with the rail and make sure that they are there? Because for me and for everybody we've ever spoken to, the first day it goes wrong is the last day you use it. So if we go in with that mentality, we've got to build it so that, in other words, it doesn't depart within 1 minute. It's got a number of minutes, but also there's technological links now to make sure that that train talks to that bus, or the bus talks to the bus, if that makes sense.
You happy with that, Tina?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it'll be fun to see this roll out, won't it? And which areas are picked, because I hope some of them are very rural, and I hope I hope it's sort of this direction, being cheeky.
I've got another question from Nick Hignett, but Nick, if you could just hang on a second. There was just one thing that occurred to me, James, which is we have already a community transport network. Can we, I mean, is it possible to integrate this in some way with your new ideas? Because I know that there are disadvantages to some of the way that some of them have to work because they're so reliant on volunteer drivers, etc. But at the same time, they do perform a valuable service. So how would you integrate those?
Absolutely, Chair. They're fantastic, and hopefully the slide that we showed earlier emphasised that and their importance to community. I think when we look at this and we drill down to specific areas, so we take it from a model system to actually an area like Tina, say, for example, we look at what community transport is available there and talk to them about how they can actually provide that linked transport, so they can be some of that solution. So taking people from the local communities to the rail, taking them to the smaller transport hub. There's no point in us replicating something that's actually already existing there, but if we can strengthen it, and it's through funding it in a different way that actually makes it more sustainable for them, then they can potentially grow. We've spoken to them a lot over the years. They're very keen to be innovative, to grow. I think a friendly bus in Broseley, Shrewsbury Dial-a-Ride, Cube in Oswestry, fantastic. All of them are. I only named 3, but they're all 3 of those are very, very innovative, and I think they'd be very happy to sit down and talk to us and actually be part of this solution rather than it's actually something else as well. It's all got to be in the same pot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you've got it spot on there, if I may say so. Nick Hignett, your question.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nick Hignett, Lay Valley Ward. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. It was just a quick question really regarding, and excuse me if I missed this in the presentation, but the Shropshire Hills shuttle buses that were running and were very successful pre-pandemic. Could you tell me what plans there are to keep this going and expand it, bearing in mind that it looks like certainly this year and possibly for a few years to come, we're going to see a lot more use of our tourist facilities and a lot more people walking the hills and wanting to use this service. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Nick. James?
I think Councillor Hignett certainly, in response, we've certainly had no discussions about whether that's that changed or disappeared entirely. I think you're absolutely right that and I think it alludes back to what I said about understanding the new demand and movement patterns. And I think that we all know that staycations etc. are going to increase. So perhaps in the first instance we need to look inwardly and say how do we move those people within our county and within this country. But yeah, all of those services were essential before the pandemic. We've just got to understand what is the demand on them, because the demand in many ways, as you said, could be far greater. So then actually, how does that fit into the system? But none of this has got plans about at this stage about this bus service will do X or Y or go. It's more about the vision and the idea if we're on the right track. But somewhere, something like that, I think we've got to look at it with a new lens, as it were, as we come out of the pandemic and we start to move outside again on the 29th, because as you said, uptake could be more significant than it was before. So that could be a really good news story for that type of service.
Chairman.
Yes. Is that
Les? I do apologise. I can't get my chat function to work.
Don't worry, Les. Do ask a question now.
Yes, I'm delighted to see this report. A couple of things. Without the community car scheme in Bridgnorth, which runs alongside the Bridgnorth and Transport Group, Bridgnorth would be in dire straits, because getting to Telford Hospital from Bridgnorth for appointments is very difficult indeed. And the community car scheme fills that gap where we can. But the district transport group does go into all the villages around. But of course, you have to be a member or join up to use this facility. So it's a difficult one, isn't it, to try and make that a joined up function with what you're trying to achieve. But with the rural areas, without these transport groups and without the community car scheme, Bridgnorth would be in some difficulty there.
I don't know whose telephone that is, but if somebody could possibly sit on it, that'd be helpful. Thank you. James, do you want to comment?
Yes, and I think Councillor Winwood is when we say community transport, sometimes we as officers fall foul of that. It's not just the bus, it is the car. And community cars locally organised have been absolutely fantastic, especially through the pandemic. So taking people, but before, what a one-to-one service that is, taking people to the hospital, they wait for them, make sure that they're there to take them back. So I don't think that it's certainly impossible to integrate community transport into this model with the membership scheme. I think a lot of this could be conversations around contracts, because they do undertake a number of contracts for us, those community groups I mentioned before, especially those three. So rather than a commercial operator necessarily in the wider sense of a bus operator picking up the sort of the rural connect scenario, I think those rural community groups would be in a great position for us to have conversations with them about what changes would they need to adopt or make with our support to enable them to actually undertake some of that function for us in the rural communities where there is no transport, to take you to a hub or to a rail service. And actually then the benefit for them in the community is that funding almost helps them with the running of their organisation and helps them offset costs elsewhere and makes them become stronger and more resilient, which was, I think, one of the issues with the Section 19 permits that Councillor Motley was talking about earlier in the chair earlier in the piece.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
That's great stuff, James. Thank you very much indeed. I think what's important here is that, and obviously this is something that you've hooked on to. It's very important to take a holistic view of transport operators in all their shapes and sizes in Shropshire, just because of the fact that a lot of them do really perform a very, very vital role. And also it would mean that our own operation didn't have to be quite as large or expensive if we could make sure that we were making maximum use of what was already there, but maybe seeing if they can work in a slightly different way. It does seem to me that you've taken on an absolutely huge job here, but I'm so glad you're obviously full of vim and vigour and keen to get on with it, because I think this could actually transform the whole area of transport in Shropshire, and in particular this business of connectivity for the rural areas, which, as you know, is my particular area of concern. But there is just one question that I wanted to ask you before I let you go, which is we are at the moment heavily subsidising various parts of our networks. How do you see the future of those?
I think that's a really good question, a great way to end, Chair, because bus usage in the pandemic is, even when things relaxed a little bit last summer, didn't get above 60%. So a lot of the operators in the industry will say that we're probably only likely to get back to 80% in the next 2 to 3 years, unless we do something innovative, as we're discussing. So I think that's the driver for me. Excuse the inevitable transport pun from me. is that if we left things as they were, I think the cost per subsidy on the buses would be significant. So some of them, if we took away that 1.2 million support from the DfT that might end at some point, I think we'd see a lot of commercial services potentially become unviable, that the council would have to pick up, and those subsidised services that we probably thought were costly per passenger head before the pandemic could easily double. So we believe that in a lot of these scenarios, that actually if we think about the way we fund excuse me, public transport in some areas a little bit differently, that actually some of these schemes will be self-funding, that we can do it from some of the existing subsidy, and where not, I think if we can tap into that DfT funding mechanism, which we need to be going for in earnest, and plans are already afoot, as you can imagine, to do that. But I think if we'd left it as it is, and we went and we hope the pandemic we recovered, I think that we would find that public transport in Britain, and I think that's the commentary, it's not just Shropshire, but in a rural area, that we would lose bus services. I think they would almost become unsustainable for the council to subsidise in many ways. So I think now is the right time to start looking to change, not just for innovation's sake, but actually to build on what's happened over the 12 months of the pandemic, and actually how people have changed their habits. I think now's the opportunity to build back something actually better than it was before, if to coin a phrase.
Great. Okay, James, thank you very much for that response. And now I think we must let you go. We've really taken up too much of your time, but that was a very, very interesting report. I would like to recommend to members that James, that you come back to this committee probably in 6 months' time, just so that we can track the progress that you're making, and any bumps in the road, again, excuse the pun, and really keep alongside this, because I think this is something that really needs driving forward. Oh dear, sorry. This is terrible. I didn't want to do that. Okay, thank you so much, James.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Right.
Right. Now we move on. So we're noting James's update, but we're also asking him to come back. So if we could just note that as well. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the library strategy. I think we're all very conscious of the fact that the council's libraries have had quite a difficult time. They've had to be shut for quite a lot of the time. But at the same time, they have for some while been undergoing a period of transition. And the council is very keen on the whole to maximise its investment in library buildings and staff. But at the same time, we need to save money, and we need to make better use of funding. And we also want to develop libraries in different ways. And it does seem to me that there's been a lot of work going on in this, providing other services, not just lending books, but a lot of libraries have been used for their media capabilities. And there is a library transformation strategy that I think has just come out, hasn't it? So what is it that we actually want to get out of the library transformation study? Have we got Michael Lewis with us from the libraries that I see?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, hi.
Would you like to take us through this? And we also have the portfolio holder, I think, Councillor Picton, who's still with us, am I right?
You are, Councillor Motley.
Okay, well, Councillor Picton, do you want to introduce this then, and then we'll ask Michael to take it over, or do you want to do a double act, or do you want to, how do you want to play it?
Well, I'm catching Michael on the hop because I don't think he even realised I was going to be here. So, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. All I would say is I'd like the members to think about the library as a service, not necessarily about buildings. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Michael take you through it. Yeah, I think this is something I've heard from you before, Councillor Picton. I'm sure members will take that on board. Thank you very much, Michael. Over to you.
Right. Yeah. Our draft strategy is supposed to outline our promise as a council and set out the priority to focus on delivery of a commercial, contemporary and adaptable community service in the future. The strategy is supposed to outline our vision and strategic objectives and highlights the importance of libraries within the community setting and describing our core offer, which is to provide facilities for reading, information, digital services, health, learning, culture and creativity, whilst also working in partnership to deliver that. And as Leslie states, our service is not just about communities, but about buildings, but communities. And we want to look at how we engage with those communities to develop co-working services and co-design of those services. With that in mind, we've engaged consultants to build on our draft strategy by developing a library transformation strategy. And we want to renew the current library services and make recommendations that will transform the library and information services and its assets and deliver a modern and exciting and sustainable service. The transformation strategy will build on our opportunities identified as a result of the review, and as a result consider the changes that we need to do and the life changes that have occurred during COVID. So I suppose what we want from the communities overview committee is to provide feedback and comment in respect of our progress to date and of the next stages for the library transformation. We also want to provide some feedback on the development of our new transformation strategy, and then allow us to come back, let's say in the autumn, to look at the progress of our transformation and then give us more comment. I think I want to be brief there, so just to give you an overview.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Michael. Now, Daniel?
Hello, Chair. Yes, Daniel Webb here, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. I just wanted to mention as well, Chair, that Jane Trethewey, who's the Assistant Director for Homes and Communities, is also at the meeting.
Oh, that's fine. I'm so sorry. I picked up that she was also here for the Communities and Rural Strategy, but I didn't realise that she was also on for this one. I'm so sorry about that, Daniel. Jane, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's really
and I do apologise to you for that oversight.
It's not a problem at all. No, thank you very much. And Michael's very capably introduced anyway what we're looking to do with the library's transformation strategy, which is really, you know, as he says, sort of looking at the future of the library service and how we can make it adapted to the position we find ourselves in particular some of the changes since the pandemic. I think the library service has proved itself to be absolutely vital for a lot of the communities that it serves. And we want to build on that really as we review the service and what it can deliver over the next few months.
Thank you, Jane, very much for that. And apologies once again for missing that you were also presenting on this. We have the library strategy report. Now, who would like to ask some questions on this? Because I think it is it's really interesting to see how you think the libraries are going to work, as it were, within community hubs. I'm conscious of the fact that community hubs are, if anything, a slightly overworked phrase, aren't they? Insofar as we already feel that we do have some community hubs, and we need to. I'm not quite sure how libraries are going to work in with, as it were, existing hubs. If anybody could enlighten me on that issue, I would be very grateful before I open this up.
Perhaps, Chair, I can comment on the fact that we do already have some examples of that. So obviously the Bishop's Castle Enterprise House library, which is located in a hub that provides other services as well and is working very successfully. And also the library in Cleobury Mortimer that sits within the Cleobury Country facility. So there are some good examples of that already in existence. I do think there is I take your point about community hubs being one of those expressions that can perhaps be interpreted in many ways. And at the moment there are efforts afoot to look at how council services are provided differently, again, as a result of the impact of the pandemic. And I think the realisation that, you know, there is no need for all of the council's offices to be located in Shire Hall, and there are opportunities for people to work more remotely, including from different parts of the community. And equally that library services could be part of that. So in some respects, it can be the case that libraries are located within other community facilities, but equally it's possible for the existing library buildings to be utilised for more broad community activities than they have been to date, and to build on what they already have in terms of their status in the community as you know, friendly places that any members of the public can walk into and access during opening hours and feel very welcome there. And that's something that I think the library service wants to build on in the way that it delivers its services in future.
Thank you very much for that, Jane. Any questions, please? I don't seem to have anything up on my chat function. Any comments from those who have community hubs in their towns or areas? How they would like to see these developing? I'm thinking particularly of Bridgenorth. Les, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's all right. I'm still trying to fiddle with the chat function. I'll get through. Bridgenorth, obviously, yes, it is a vital part of our community, and as far as so much more could be done, as you say, and I hope that going forward that far more is done and make it a busier place. But the council has an element of staff in there with council tax and buzz passes and such forth, and that is so vital. I just wonder, could you just, moving forward, because I just can't put my hand on the page on the report, how far or how much more could we do in there as far as we're concerned as the council being in there for information for such things as that we're now providing, and what could we add to it?
I suppose we could look at co-working spaces and how we develop them further. There are additional spaces within Bridgenorth. There's a couple of offices that are used for different services, and we can look at expanding those services to incorporate, I suppose, co-working spaces.
Yes, because that in itself, thank you, Michael. That in itself is a vital part. Once Westgate closed and the staff were no longer available for such things as paying council tax bills and people just dropping in to ask council matters, we lost all that. But the library gave it us back with staff in there, and that's why I feel it's so essential that we play a big part in this in that building. It's a great building. It's in a great spot by a car park. In fact, it was built on my grandmother's house, which is rather, yes, my grandmother's house was knocked down to build the library. But that's an aside. It's just a vital part of the community, and I do feel that we could be doing more in there as a council. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Les. Jane, do you want to come in there?
No, I think Michael covered it anyway, really, just to say that, yes, that there are services that we do provide in addition to traditional library services, and part of the library transformation review that's in hand at the moment is specifically looking at ways in which the council can do more with the space that it has. So very much along the lines that you're suggesting.
Good.
Thanks very much for that, Jane. Now I have a question from Tina, please. Tina Woodward.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I was actually interested to know how much take-up we'd had online because of COVID, basically. How many sort of e-books and other sort of listening books and other facilities that we'd actually offered. I just wondered if the take-up had been found to be easy and effective for users, if we've got any feedback at this stage, because I do see that, yes, it's lovely to hold a book and I understand those functions, but I'm looking at the opportunities moving forward, which I'm sure the team are. We've had children that have missed schooling. We've had people that, you well-being, bringing that in, and mental health is a way moving forward where people are going to need support. And I think there are opportunities in our buildings, but it's also interesting in how you want to do outreach, because the division that I'm in has a van that comes round and it does the library and it does that, but I'd hate us to lose that if there is nothing to replace it working with the community. So I think there are a number of questions, particularly the online and how we can help with learning and other things. So I'll leave that for you to respond, officers, please.
Thank you, Tina. Jane or Michael?
Yeah, we've had an uptake of about 600% in terms of online provision for people. It's quite easy to join, so we've made it. Well, we have made it very easy to join, so we've continued that take up. We've also looked at our library budgets and changed them to emphasise the digital aspect of the service. But we also have been pressured at the same time to provide that physical service. So at present, although we do provide a digital service, we also provide a click and collect service for customers who want to come in and have a physical book. So we have to look at balancing the two in terms of ensuring those services are delivered going forward. In terms of outreach, I would say we've got a library development team that do work with customers who don't really use that traditional service. So what we try to do is ensure that we have that contact with the community to ensure that the services fits their needs. And we have a development team that will talk to them about what they need from us. So we are trying to balance all those services. So we deliver for the digital aspects as well as the physical aspects.
Thank you for that, Michael. I've got another question now from Vivian Parry. Viv?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again, Michael.
Nice to see you, Bill.
Yes, long time. Can I just say, I know how hard Ludlow Library work and the way the click and collect work is absolutely fantastic. I also know the things that they do when we haven't got COVID, of all the groups and the people, and you can join in with all these different things. And really, a lot of people have really missed that, including to be able to use the laptops and things in the library, because a lot of people in the town do not have that amount of money to buy a laptop or an iPad. So it's been greatly missed. I also would like to say that the hub that we've had, where you can go in and talk to the young ladies who will help you with anything at all to do with council, making council things out, and if they're homeless or anything, they can go and speak to them straight away, or to help with the food bank. Now, we really miss those people. You know, the people of this town really miss that. And I just wondered why we've got this down about sorting services. Do officers envisage that there will be understanding and tolerance and space to allow kindness to be talked about? Well, I'm sorry, they really, really do that in Ludlow Library. Ludlow Library is one of the kindest places. They speak to you straight away. They'll help you anytime you want help. So I'm just wondering where that's come from. Please, can we have our hub back where these people can be helped? We're going to have an awful lot of people out of work. We need people to talk to. It's not that good to talk on a telephone. For people who maybe haven't got the ability to express themselves, and they have a hard job talking to people. So if we could have that back, I know I have a smart borough if we possibly could. But thank you for all the work that you do. I really love Ludlow Library, and actually the building is important in Ludlow because it's got all those museum pieces in that if we didn't have anywhere to keep them, we'd be in a poor place for the whole county. But thank you.
Good point.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a good point, actually, Viv, particularly about Ludlow Library. Does anybody want to just comment on any of Viv's remarks?
Yeah, I mean, Ludlow Library will continue to be developed in the same way that it always has. In terms of events, we will work to reintroduce events when we open around the 12th of April. But what we have to do is we have to build up towards ensuring that those events are then delivered back into our libraries. Yes. In terms of the face-to-face aspects of that, we are in negotiations to ensure that they come back, but we have to look at those in the long term. Yes. And look at whether they are can be delivered within the same sphere, because we things have slightly changed in terms because of the pandemic, but we have to make sure that those spaces are safe for our customers, but also safe for our staff. But we will be working to reintroduce events in the near future.
Yes. And can I ask something else? Could we possibly have maybe a hub half a day a week in some of the village halls? That would really help the people living in those villages. Thank you.
Well, Viv, I'll tell you what, we'll wrap that up in a question that I'm about to ask on this. But before I do, there's just one particular issue that I just wanted to go into in a little more detail, which is one of the objectives that is listed in the report is that of improved health and well-being of Shropshire communities. I'm just wondering, particularly, what do you have in mind with regards to how one does that within the setting of a library, whether within or outside a building, as it were?
Well, we intend to work very closely with our health colleagues to ensure that libraries are not just places where you can come and borrow books, but also we can signpost you to those health and well-being aspects for communities. We also want to ensure that we are social spaces, so we want to invite people in, but as I've said, that will take time to reinvigorate. But that's where we're heading to. We have to enable that. There is a lot of loneliness within Shropshire within the Shropshire communities, and what we have to do is ensure that we have services that are inclusive for our communities, rather than just look at it as in terms of providing services. We're also looking at being social spaces, but also connecting them with those health and wellbeing practitioners.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. And just one of the other issues that I have a particular interest in, and you won't be surprised to hear this, is the issue of mobile libraries. Now, the mobile libraries, I know, are large, unwieldy beasts, because they're not terribly well suited to the sort of terrain that they have to go over. Because a lot of them have to go up and down the hills and in and out of the byways, but they are very much valued. And I'm just wondering what the overall plan is going to be for mobile libraries, because one has to bear in mind that in terms of what Michael was talking about, in terms of health and well-being, and also particularly rural isolation, the mobile libraries do make a significant contribution towards people who are rural and isolated. And actually do rely quite heavily on the mobile libraries, albeit they don't come that frequently. So I just wondered if anybody could just enlighten me as to where mobile libraries come into this strategy, please.
Yeah, the mobile libraries are an integral part of our strategy as well. What we have done at present, we are updating our fleet. I say fleet. There's only 4 mobiles, but we are updating them because we feel that presently they need to be smaller, but also more inclusive of what services they have on board. So at present, we are working to get a new one on board. And I suppose working with our transport colleagues at the moment to try and move them into the 21st century, so that they are more mobile, they are more, but also allow more customers to come on board, and they're more fuel efficient. So we're looking at a long-term future for our mobiles, and then moving with the times to ensure that they are, I suppose, efficient, but also able to adapt to or limit our carbon footprint.
Okay, thank you for that. I have Keith Roberts now who'd like to speak, please.
No, I'm okay now, Chair, because you've taken my thunder. You mentioned mobile libraries. The other thing, we're talking about mobile libraries. I think it's great that we're looking at getting a new vehicle, but would any other services be offered on a mobile library? Again, people in a very rural setting, with this pandemic, etc., they might need some help, and that's maybe the only person that they could speak to from the council. Would there be any sort of help for other matters?
I think that's a very good question. You know, at the moment, those mobiles do have a lot of stops, so nearly 300 stops. We would have to work in partnership with our colleagues within the council to deliver any different services. But it is something that we will be looking at as part of the transformation to ensure that those services are made more available.
Are you all right with that, Keith? Okay.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions that they'd like to ask?
Hello, Chair. Councillor Nick Hignett. I'm not sure
yes,
I'm not sure if I'm showing on the chat line, but
you're not actually. Oh yes, hang on. No, you weren't missed actually because you didn't come up.
Oh, it should have come up. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry about that.
It was just a comment, really, so much as anything. Not so much a question, but just to mention in my ward, Ponsbury Community Library obviously was due to have a big opening last year and absolutely ruined by the pandemic, like so many other plans and arrangements. But thank you to Michael from a personal point of view for the negotiations we had with him, which helped the library to open in spite of the pandemic. And I think the click and collect has actually worked quite well. But I wanted to say that as a community hub in what we're calling the pavilion, there is the intention to be much more inclusive and to hold lots of events there. We've got a very strong Friends of Ponsbury Library group which meets regularly and holds lots of events, or will do when they're allowed to. And we are intending to involve the health centre next door for many health classes and wellbeing classes. And the intention is the library will have enough space, and it's got a couple of meeting rooms in that hub as well. So we are hoping to carry out or bring to fruition a lot of the ideas and suggestions that have been put forward today. So just thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Nick. That's very helpful. Tina, did you want to come in as well? Tina Woodward.
Sorry, Chairman, your voice faded on me. I thought you said me, and then I couldn't quite hear.
Yeah. No,
what I would say is, thank you. Is the funding for this transformation, is there a transformation budget? Because I noticed the savings of 137k for 2021-2022. So I'm just concerned that might not be the funding to achieve, I think, what the service would like to deliver. So if I could have some reassurance on how the funding is going to be, please.
At the moment, we have been asked to make, yes, we've been asked to make those savings, but they're not immediate. And the first bit of the strategy will look at our commerciality and our value for money. So what we are trying to do is look at commercial aspects to cover that, and to ensure that the service that we are able to deliver our transformation. Is that it? Did you get that, Cecilia?
Yes, sorry, it was me that was muted, not Tina. Tina, are you happy with that response? Sorry.
Yeah, I am. I'd be interested to know the commercial element of where you're going to actually, you know, make money, I suppose.
Yeah, I think libraries, it's very difficult for libraries to make money at present, but we have a lot of buildings, and we're going to look at trying to make money from our buildings rather than selling any items, because I think although we have a very large network, we can manage those spaces to encourage our staff to make additional income.
So, sorry, can I come back on that?
Yes.
Do we have that type of capacity then in a number of our buildings that we currently have?
Yeah, and I think we need to look at, we are looking at expanding those facilities, because at present we didn't have any control over those commercial aspects, but we are working to get more of those back into libraries rather than the corporate entity that we have to give our money to at present.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, could I make a comment, please? I can't, like Councillor Winwood, I don't have a chat facility. Councillor Picton.
Yes, Councillor Picton, indeed you may.
Thank you. Tina, in answer to your question, one of the things that Michael's just alluded to, and I'll put it in plain English, is that in the past, if the library service have run events, the monies that they've made from those events have gone to the corporate landlord instead of actually going to the libraries itself. It goes back to almost what we were talking about right at the beginning of this meeting. But there's quite a few ways. So, I mean, increased events and that sort of thing, and some of the online work that's been going on could over the pandemic could easily continue in the real sort of in the new normal, but also there's lots of other things, and you'll be aware probably of some of the new libraries that have opened around the country, not necessarily in new buildings, but you know, libraries aren't places where you say shh anymore, and I've said that probably a million times now, but there is the possibility of looking at having small cafes in there, etc., and that all comes back to, and I don't want to use the word community hub, but making it a centre to attract more people in. So there are lots of opportunities for more commercialism within all our services, actually, and that includes libraries.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Picton. If we have no more questions, I would just ask whether Jane Trethewey or Michael have anything further they'd like to add before I wrap up.
I have nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
No, just to say that we'd be very happy, as Michael alluded to earlier, to come back later in the year to give the committee an update on the progress of the transformation programme.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually that leads us smoothly into the recommendations on the strategy, which you have up before you. The Communities Overview Committee members provide feedback and comment in respect of progress made to date in the next stages of the library transformation, which I think we've done. Communities Overview Committee provide feedback and comment on the development of the new library transformation strategy. Ditto. Now, under 3, Communities Overview Committee receives a further update in respect of the library transformation strategy project in autumn 2021. I would just like to add to that and an update with regards to progress on developing mobile libraries and rural provision, please, because I think we need to be looking perhaps slightly more proactively about how we could be making use of what at least one member has referred to in terms of the potential of village halls, and how we tie up the mobile libraries with the village halls, because that actually, I have in one of my parishes a situation where the mobile library always coincides with a coffee morning for elderly people. And it all becomes, it becomes a very important part of the day, and it's all about dealing with that rural isolation that I was talking about earlier. Obviously, with COVID, the village hall has been shut, but post-COVID, we need to be looking for these opportunities, I feel, in which we can use our mobile libraries possibly in a more proactive manner. So if I would very much like to see that included into the transformation strategy for libraries, if we could. And I am going to propose that myself, along with the other 2 items on the recommendations. Do I have a seconder, please?
Chair, Keith Roberts, I'll second it.
Sorry, was that Keith? Thank you very much indeed.
Yes.
Is everybody happy to agree that addition to the 3rd item on the recommendations, please?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And may I thank all of you, Michael, Jane, and particularly Councillor Picton, who has been with us for all of this meeting, is probably absolutely exhausted and now wants to go and have a nice cup of tea. So thank you all very much for your attendance, and we will now move on, because I'm conscious of time, to the community and rural strategy. And now, in order that I don't fall flat on my face again, please, can I ask Jane Trethewey, still with us?
Yes.
If you'd like to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I believe Emily's going to click on the presentation for me as we go through it. So thanks to her for that as well.
Thank you.
Not at all. This is a presentation that I've pulled together to reflect on the community and rural strategy that went to Cabinet last year, I believe in October, and to reflect on where it's got to since then, and I believe some changes that really we need to contemplate to it going forwards, and to seek really the input of the Communities Overview Committee with any comments they have about their thoughts as to how it needs to progress from where it is. So if you can move me on, Emily, please. So just by way of background, as a sort of a refresher where this came from, the strategy itself, it was developed with input from voluntary and community groups in the first place, as well as with SALC members who brought together lots of ideas from the town and parish councils as well. These were worked up together with the SALC working group. This work was led by Tom Dodds, and he pulled together the report around it, and it incorporated then some concepts around developing local plans and structures, although these weren't fully formed in the report that went to Cabinet. It was just a reference as to how this might work. Based approximately on place plan areas was the concept. And supported by hubs again, where potentially staff members, council staff members could drop down and spend time based at desks within these community hubs and make those links locally in order to provide a more relevant potentially service in those localities and for those communities. The concept, I think, was also to look at how we expand on some existing good examples of working with our communities and localities. So examples such as the place plan work that's been in hand for quite some time, and the Right Home, Right Place survey work run by colleagues in housing. So if you can move me on, Emily, thank you. So there were a series of shared priorities that were identified and are referenced in the community and rural strategy. And these are what they are. The first is keeping everyone happy and healthy, then helping people to connect with others and enjoy themselves, finding effective and sustainable ways to move people around. Obviously the transport that was referenced earlier in this meeting, embracing skills and experiences from our older generation, having the right homes in the right places, attracting and keeping young people in the county in a skilled workforce, and improving physical digital connectivity and looking at that climate impact. And I think looking down that list, one of the things that particularly struck me about it as I started to look at this was really that not only are these quite high level sort of strategic concepts that are identified as priorities, but also they're very broad ranging, so they cover the activities of a number of different departments and teams across the council in terms of their ambition, and that's perfectly understandable because communities have interest in all of these areas, but I think in terms of having a community and rural strategy that has this sort of broad ambition, I think what we now need to do is think about how we develop something more specific that this strategy actually wants to deliver underneath those broad ambitions. So that would be my first comment on what we see there. Could I have the next slide, please, Emily? So there are also some underpinning principles referenced in the strategy, which is helpful. So making a difference for residents, having clearly defined and understood roles and responsibilities. I think this references community and voluntary groups, town and parish councils, Shropshire Council itself. Implementing adaptive and effective decision making. I think this reflects on the fact that there needs to be clear links between the decision making that might happen at local level and also what then happens at county-wide level. Being open-minded, embracing changes and learning from feedback. Demonstrating leadership by all concerned. Dealing with uncertainty by looking for and implementing solutions, communicating clearly and concisely, and avoiding generalised assumptions that maybe don't reflect everybody's position. So I think a little bit like the goals that we saw on the previous page, I think these are all kind of things that one could probably straightforwardly accept as ambitions in terms of the way that the principles are drafted. And I think it speaks to the way that perhaps communities haven't over recent years felt that they have clear communication lines, for example, or clear roles set out for them. So there's nothing here that would necessarily cause difficulty, but I think there is again a need to look at how this is then actually put into practice. Next slide, please. So there are some actions referenced in the strategy then to develop an evidence base with data including from the pandemic response, to understand community needs, identify inequality and areas for action, to build on multi-agency partnerships in localities with the voluntary community sector groups, the town and parish councils, public sector colleagues, and through this to develop locality working. So this is the concept that we actually respond to the very different needs and priorities that we might see in communities up and down the county, rather than having a Shropshire-wide one-size-fits-all concept. Develop county-wide and local plans then to address where there are shared priorities. And for those plans to provide for the town and parish councils, voluntary community groups, businesses and the council services to show how they're going to work jointly to deliver shared local priorities, and then create a governance that actually guides the development and delivery of these local plans, thinks about where the resources come for them, and sets out the actions for the future, with the concept that that governance is geographically representative of local communities, with all of these different representatives on board. So I'd say, you know, in terms of the actions that are set out in the strategy, again, these are looking at more of a structural response to how the Shropshire Council and the communities and the town and parish councils relate to each other and work with each other, rather than specifically delivering the goals that are sort of set out at the start of the strategy and start of this presentation. And I think, again, this structural piece is something that we need to come back to, because I think that's something that's quite fundamental in terms of how we move forwards with these thoughts that are set out in the strategy. Next slide, please, Emily. So the draft strategy, as it went to the October Cabinet, then went out to consultation, and it was sent out to a range of voluntary and community groups, many of whom had participated in the initial workshops to develop the strategy. And some feedback was received from this as a piece of work done by the council. And these are the comments that they had, just in brief summary, really. First of all, there was a question about Shropshire Council's ability and commitment to engage effectively at a community level this is both in terms of the approach and also the availability of resources within Shropshire Council. And I think particularly at the moment during the pandemic, that is a fair comment about the pressure on resources. Although I think there are kind of ways in which we do already relate to communities that perhaps we can try and corral better. A comment about the importance of a place-based approach, recognising different needs within different communities, which is, I think, a comment that is throughout the draft strategy itself. The importance of diversity and inclusion in terms of how this is made to work. There's a concern reflected in the comments about over-reliance on volunteers and a sense that there needs to be some clarity about these roles and responsibilities to make sure that local leadership action is actually supported and enabled rather than just perhaps an assumption that these various groups, voluntary and community groups out there, can sort of step up without that kind of support. I think that's very important. Also, recognition that the pandemic has really created significant changes, which has been referenced already in this meeting in relation to other activities, and these really need to be considered now, and I think that's absolutely critical, really. And then request to consider some issues in greater detail than have already been referenced in the strategy, because the strategies we've referenced earlier is quite high level. So thinking about businesses and how they are supported, skills, employment, climate change, that whole digital connectivity piece that's been referenced, rural transport, which we've already touched on today, the social infrastructure, addressing those issues of inclusion and loneliness and isolation, and also culture in the broader sense. So there are clearly some gaps here that there's a concern that we need to make sure that we pick up. And I think the business skills employment in particular coming out of the pandemic is quite a significant one, because these are real pressures that communities will be experiencing in the rural economy in particular. And then the final comment was really about the very high level and overarching nature of the strategy, which doesn't contain a great deal of detail, and the need for some clear action planning around this, which I think is fair comment, really, because at the moment the strategy is drafted in terms of a reference to the data that we have about our county and about the rural communities within it, and it sort of sets that kind of stage really for what might happen next, but without yet going into the detail about how that might work and what impact that might have. Next slide please, Emily, and the next one as well. So this is really to think about the pandemic impacts. So the nice photographs were really just to sort of show that we are all now working with the masks on and socially distancing. And I think, you know, referencing some of the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic is worth doing at this stage, really, to think about how that needs to influence what we do next with the community and rural strategy. It has absolutely been the case that there has been a real diversion of public resources at local and national level over 2021, and that will, we know, continue beyond, and it's inevitable because of the nature of what the public sector has had to deal with. Just a few comments really on this slide about some of the impacts that have been seen. There are many more than I've referenced here, but furlough numbers are higher in January than any time since July. So over 20,000 people in the county, 15% of eligible employees are actually on furlough at the moment. Obviously, when furlough ends, we don't know what that will mean for those individuals, if they'll be able to pick up their employment again, if their jobs will be retained by their employers. Lots of difficult decisions in there, and potential impacts on our local economy. Universal credit numbers in January up to over 21,000, and that's showing a greater degree of in-work hardship. A lot of those people on universal credit are not out of work, they're in work but on very low incomes, and that's a real pressure that we're experiencing. We know that the economic downturn is affecting public sector income. There is reduced central government funding coming to local authorities, and also council tax and business rates reduced, plus all sorts of other revenue streams for the council equally impacted, which is reported in other places. We know that there is an impact on different groups within the population that we need to understand better. For example, we have our younger generations really bearing an impact on education and opportunity as a result of the pandemic, and I think we need to understand how that is playing out and what we might need to do to respond to that as well as we can. There are also, of course, other groups, so isolated elderly, people who have various health issues being particularly impacted over the last year and will continue to be for a while longer yet. We've also seen that real understanding of the necessity of self-care, support for people to be able to look after themselves within their communities, that whole community well-being thing becoming far, far more important. And the communities and various voluntary groups and community groups and simply, you know, neighbours and people within our communities stepping up to respond to that, which has been a fantastic thing to see across Shropshire. And also we can see different work-life patterns are becoming the norm. We're seeing that just within Shropshire Council, but we're seeing that in lots of other places as well. And we don't quite yet know how that is going to play itself out in terms of impact on our businesses and on our economy across Shropshire. And of course impacts on the economy more broadly, on travel, on the housing market, things like the visitor economy, for example. We could see great booms in the visitor economy for Shropshire. We certainly hope so, but there may also be pressures in that we don't quite understand yet, and all of this we need to try and grasp a hold of so that we benefit from the upswings that may occur, but also protect ourselves against some of the kind of potential negatives as well. So this is just to sort of point out some of the things that we need to grab a hold of and try and reflect, I think, as we're planning around this community and rural strategy going forwards. Next slide, please, Emily. So there are obviously opportunities that will come out of this. So we're already sensing reference to a levelling up agenda from government that may help to direct funds differently across the public sector. And there is potential within the council for us to contemplate this as well in the way that we work. There's been announced a £150 million community ownership fund to allow communities across the UK to invest to protect the assets that matter to them most, and that's something that it may be possible for different groups across the community to access and to benefit from, and that's something for us to take a look at further. There could be additional funding windfalls coming through as well. It's hard to tell how this is going to pan out, but I think we need to position ourselves as the council to take advantage of those wherever they arise, to maximise the benefits for our local communities that could come from that. So there are also some activities already in hand within the council to look at place-based planning. So there is a pilot happening at the moment in Wem looking at place-based assets. So we're thinking about what we do with the council's existing assets in Wem and how we work with the town council there, how we make the most of what we've got and think about it in that local space and maximise the investments that we have there and the assets that we have there to the best benefits of that local community. So we can build upon that kind of work approach that's already in hand. There are also, as I've mentioned earlier, lots of incredible community responses and outreach work that's been developed during the pandemic response and is still happening. So Penny Basin is on the call. She's been working with Rachel Robertson and others with in the pandemic response piece about how to reach out to communities within Shropshire who don't necessarily respond well to things like the vaccination rollout, and we want to make sure that we link to those communities, communicate with them well, and then we can build on those contacts that we have and make more of that going forwards. I think there's also a greater willingness to adopt to more remote digital communication, such as we're experiencing right now. I think that does create opportunities in future for different ways of communicating with our communities across the county. So areas that may previously have felt very isolated, there may be an opportunity for us to connect to them differently now that we know and people are more accepting of this sort of digital communication as a norm. I appreciate, of course, that there are still members of the community who will always find that difficult, and we always will also need to have that face-to-face link, but there is still an opportunity in this that I think we can seek to maximise. There are potential new routes by which council members and communities that they represent can influence, can raise issues, can be part of the response that can arise from this better connection. And I'm struggling to, the image that I put on here has taken out my last bullet point on here, so I'm struggling to I put on there. Forgive me, let me have a look. It was simply that Shropshire Council's planned investment in hubs, it was going back to the community hubs point referenced earlier, for easier access to information and services. That was the point referenced there. Next slide, please, Emily. So thinking about some of the next steps from here, I think what we need to do is think about now a plan for how the draft community and rural strategy can start to link into other council work, some of which is already in hand and we've already talked about today. So the library transformation project we've already referenced. I think libraries are key community assets and something that the community and rural strategy needs to link to, and part of its planning as to how we communicate with our Shropshire communities everywhere. The health and wellbeing strategy under development, the council's new corporate plan and the proposals coming through from that. The image that you see on the slide there is one that comes from discussions around the joint strategic needs assessment, which is being developed, and you'll notice that the bottom right hand side of the image references the places and communities we live in and with, and these 4 items here are the things that influence healthy outcomes, and it specifically references the fact that communities are a key part of healthy outcomes. How we relate to those communities, how they support us, are absolutely critical and crucial. I think the community and rural strategy can recognise and link with all of these other strategic activities to make sure that we give the right responses to our communities. And the Refocus programme, which is a piece of a more internal looking work for the council about how we work at Shropshire Council, but to make sure that in the way that services are delivered across the council, noting that the community and rural strategy ambitions actually are council wide in their scope, and I think the Refocus programme needs to adopt the community and rural strategy principles in terms of how it wants the council's strategies across the board to be developed, so that these community aspects are always picked up. Next slide, please, Emily. Following the strategy approval at Cabinet last October, and then the consultation from October to December, and then the conclusion of the analysis of that consultation that happened in January. What we've since done is to initiate discussions in a cross-departmental way, looking at that draft strategy and thinking about those proposed actions and the sort of sketch of a structure, a suggestion of a structure that was put in that strategy. And I think what we need to do now is actually revise the strategy in response to both the feedback that we've had from that consultation and also to our kind of continuing understanding of the impact of the pandemic in terms of the way that our council works, our economy works, our communities work, and actually kind of have that fed into that, so that we are putting something together that is going to be up to date and relevant. There is an intention to create a focus for the community and rural strategy within homes and communities, which is my team, and to add resource within my team to actually lead on this, which is what I think it's lacked since the person leading on it, holding the pen on it before, Tom Dodds, was seconded out of the council. So that sort of slightly disappeared at that point, and that needs to be brought back again to give it that focus. I think we need to restate and clarify those goals of the strategy and think about how to best approach it and share that with SALC and other critical contacts, and also with this group again. I think in hand already, courtesy of colleagues within the council, is the development of a map of the community activity that we know exists already. So based on the experience of the last year, and noting gaps in that as well. So we're very aware that whilst there are some communities that have absolutely been able to step up and support each other and help to deliver some of the work that was needed during the pandemic, there are other areas that have struggled more with that, or have really felt the need for greater support, and we need to understand that in the way that we respond with this strategy. And then I think at the end of this, we need to have developed a structure for effective dialogue between our residents, our community and voluntary groups, our towns and parish councils and Shropshire Council, because I think that's at the root of all of this. The intention behind it is to develop that structure that creates that better line of communication between all of these key parties. Next slide, please, Emily. And that is it. So I hope that helps, and I hope that gives some food for thought and states the position as we find it at the moment for the Community and Rural Strategy. I'm very happy to take any questions on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane, very much indeed. I know we've got Gwilym Butler who has asked to speak. He's the portfolio holder, of course, and has been very much leading on this. But before I invite him to speak, I just wanted to make a few comments. It's very important now that we bring this strategy down to grassroots level, I would suggest. And I think you have huge resources, and I don't mean financial resources because those are very thin on the ground indeed, but within the rural parishes and particularly also the smaller rural towns that don't get so much attention, as it were, as some of the larger hub towns, as it were. I think those are the places which could do with some concentration. The parishes have got a very, very good idea of what their needs are, what they have and what they don't have. But the last thing that they need is somebody trying to impose a strategy on them, because that actually I think would be completely counterproductive. So it's a question of finding out how we work on the ground with those parishes in a way that enables them to actually strengthen their own capacity to ensure that they have a handle on their own parishes and on the needs of their parishes. Sometimes that may need a little bit of financial input. And I'm not talking about large financial input, but I'm talking about fairly low level financial input to enable them. I mean, a lot of the parishes are already looking very seriously at very important things like what are their housing needs going forward? You know, should they be doing community-led housing strategies? A lot of them have done housing needs surveys. That's just one little area. How do they look after their vulnerable residents? What sort of support do they need in order to do that? A lot of them have got very few resources in terms of even things like, you know, health visitors and social care access and that kind of thing. And I think that we've got to think quite smart about the way we do this. Because I think this could be something that worked really incredibly well. Looking at it from a slightly broader perspective, I would commend to you, Jane, and also to Gwilym, and Gwilym will be very well aware of this, the Revitalising Rural strategy, which the Rural Services Network has just produced. It was launched on the 1st of March, and it addresses every aspect practically that you can think of, which particularly affects rural areas. And if I just give you a little bit, a flavour, I'm not going to go through the whole lot, but it's access to rural health and care services, it's rural transport, which we've been talking about earlier, it's rural economies and how we support businesses in rural areas, and further education, training and skills in rural areas, which is often quite difficult to access. How do we retrain people who may have lost their jobs without them necessarily having to travel to the large hub towns to do it? Obviously, rural affordable housing is a very big issue. How do we deal with our older rural population? And then the business aspect, particularly sustainable farming, sustainable land management, and of increasing importance, climate change and the effect that it has on our communities and how they can contribute to mitigating climate change. So I'll send you a copy of it, Jane, because I think it might just help, help you, give you a few pots that you can put your own ideas into, as it were, and a few headings which might be useful to pick up. So moving on, Gwilym, can I ask you to speak, please? And thank you very much for coming this afternoon.
Thank you, Cecilia. Just a few comments, a bit of background, really. It's interesting the bulk of this work was actually undertaken before we'd even heard of the word pandemic. And it's interesting to note that the outcomes and the aspirations that have come out of the strategy have effectively been endorsed by the pandemic. And it's actually put us in a position to fast track the outcomes because we've been forced into changing the way we do things, etc. The way I look at the actual strategy itself is like one large coat hanger that sits around the council, and then hanging off that coat hanger is everything else that we're actually looking to do. It could be most of your agenda this afternoon, Cecilia, the library strategy, the transport strategy. Yeah. It is all outcomes for the community and rural strategy. I totally agree with you that it has to be bottom up and delivered in different ways in different parts of the county. And that'll be vital to take those communities with us. The other thing that I'm challenging officers with, the delivery of the local plan. You know, how we design our future developments and our housing estates and how we make them so they respond to access to open spaces, they respond to culture and leisure, they respond to easy access to transport. It's all part of the bigger picture. And also coming post-election, as we look at redesigning our town and parish boundaries, we perhaps need to have this overriding strategy of how we want those places to look in 30 or 50 years' time and the outcomes we want, and that needs to be part of how we actually grow and develop those strategies. You know, it is quite high level, but it is one way of pulling everything we're doing in Shropshire all together and really starting to place shape, whether it's a hamlet, a hub, open countryside, small market town or large town. It's a real once in a lifetime opportunity, I think, to change the way we do things and bring everything together. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gwilym, very much. And actually, one of the things that I would like to see is to see this strategy, as it were, woven in woven in through everything that the council does, in the same way that we're doing this with the climate change issues. You know, we're always thinking about, you know, what effect are we having on climate change if we take this or that or the other piece of action.
Yeah. If I could just also comment that SALC have endorsed the strategy and are quite, you know, keen to do it from a bottom-up approach and are waiting with bated breath on how we're going to do things.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Gwilym. Can I open this now to questions? I'm just going to read a note from Penny Basin, which says, thanks for including me on this meeting, but I must go now. I'm so sorry to Penny that we couldn't bring her in earlier. There's a great opportunity for us to connect on this agenda of health and well-being in our communities across the local authority, but also with statutory and voluntary sector partners. I believe we need to fully understand the needs and assets, human and other, in communities, and engagement with our communities is a key element of understanding this. As Gwilym is suggesting, we need to connect all key elements discussed this afternoon, transport, libraries, etc. Really keen to be part of this. Well, that's extremely helpful and from Penny. If you could pass on my thanks to her, Jane, I'd be most grateful. However, she has now obscured my chat, so I can't see if anybody wants to ask a question. Can I ask anybody just to shout out now? Rural members, come along.
Chairman, it's Les.
Les, thank you. You're not rural, but you're just as good, Les.
I'm glad we can shout out because I can't get my chat thing as you know. The actual working with partners, I think in all of this, it proves the case, doesn't it? I think you get a group of people together from all quarters of the ways forward, and you put them all together. And it does actually connect, doesn't it? You bring in libraries, you bring in transport, you bring in the whole connectivity, if you like, and it makes a strategy. And I think what you told us this afternoon, and my word, it certainly is involved. It's made my head spin a little bit going through those pictures and write-ups. But as Gwilym said, it won't work unless it comes from the bottom up, and I think that's an essential way forward. But I do think partnership working. I did it with colleagues with British North West and Tasley. We had nothing. Then we put partners together and we made it work. And I think that's what it's all about. And that's how I see a strategy working, like the Broad Partnership.
Absolutely right. Well done. Thanks, Les, very much for that. Gwilym, I'll come back to you for a brief comment.
Yes, all I wanted to say, I wanted to agree with you, Chair. I didn't actually do it in my summing up, that I am challenging officers at all levels that this will have to be resourced to a certain amount. We need to be the glue to bring this together, to bring those partners and other people to the table. And we're already acknowledging that there is an awful lot of money out there and grants that Shropshire Council can't access. But if we provide the infrastructure with other partnerships within the community, they can access that funding. And we really need to get on top of that to actually get more money into our communities outside our budgets.
Thank you, Gwilym. I think that's a very good point, actually. And you're absolutely right that Shropshire Council is prohibited from accessing certain funds, which actually parishes and town councils can much more easily access, or indeed other parts of the community. So I think that's a point well made. Nigel Hartin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Jane and Gwilym for your input. That was very interesting. It's a very good high-level plan, as Gwilym's pointed out. It covers a lot of areas. I think, though, we have to be careful that we don't lose the focus on the bottom-up views from the community coming into the overall plan. And I think that's something that we seem to have lost, particularly, for example, I'm thinking about the local plan in the way that in my area, particularly, some of the views of the local community do seem to have been overridden within that process. So I think we've got to be very careful to bring the local communities with us.
Thank you, Nigel. Vivian Parry.
I again would like to voice that I'm very pleased that the parishes are going to be listened to, because that's what they've been asking for a long time. You know, if we are, Jane, actually what you had to say, I was quite astounded in all the really good points that you put forward. Things that I've talked about with my parishes and they've said to me. So thank you so much for what's come forward today. It's been a really interesting meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viv. Tina.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was great that an officer put some meat on the bones, because actually as a strategy, when you read it in its format, it's 19 pages or whatever, there wasn't a lot there in the strategy itself. It felt like a preamble to something that was going to come, but I don't see that as a strategy as it sits at the moment, I'll be honest. So it was good to hear from the officer. I do have a bit of deja vu, and I think other councillors will, that we've been here before somewhere, this working together, and somehow it's not come to total fruition. It has in some areas, and then we've got what I call black holes in others. So I really hope that Gwilym and the team that we now or teams that we now have in place, because it will be a team effort, because it's got to be corporately owned as well as owned out here in our communities. And I think that's the vital part. And I think COVID has been very difficult. It's going to be a difficult time when we come out. So I think it's very important that we have the right support in place, and we are actually having what I call shovel ready things to move forward to grab that money. And I'm putting that out to Gwilym and officers, because we still need money to deliver this on the ground. And I think it's going to be in short supply. So thank you for that. But you know, as I say, it's not a strategy as it sits in a written document to me personally, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tina, for that. Anybody else? Gwilym, do you want to come back on that? I see that you've totally agreed with her. That's absolutely excellent. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to raise on this? Because I think this does now give us something to really work with. But if not, can I thank Jane Trethui, who has been heroic this afternoon, and Gwilym too, very much indeed for your contributions to this debate. We have a recommendation that the Communities Overview Committee note the current strategy and identify any potential areas for further development. I would like to add to that myself, and sources of future financial support, because I think that's terribly important. We can have very aspirational and wonderful ideas, but if we can't fuel them with appropriate financial support, then we're not going to get them done. And this is something which I do believe very strongly really needs to happen. So is everybody happy to include that?
Yeah, it's very much so, Chair.
Yes.
Good. So could I then have a proposer that we accept the recommendation and with that addition, please?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. I think Councillor Hicknett got in just in front of you, but if Nigel, are you happy to second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much indeed. And is everybody happy to endorse that now?
Yes, fine.
Yes, fine.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you so much to our speakers. That, I think, brings us to the end of the meeting. And may I thank you all for enduring a bit of a marathon again, but I think it was very important that we got all these discussions underway and done. And I have no doubt at all that we will be seeing these coming back in the next iteration of the Communities Overview Committee, as and when that is formed post-election. And just to say that the next meeting of the Communities Overview Committee was going to be shown. We were going to try and get a quick meeting in on the 29th of March. But I don't think that we're going to achieve that, Daniel, are we? If you could just confirm.
Hello, Chair. Yeah, I think there was. I think what we tried to do was to try and tie up some of these loose ends by bringing a report back to you at the end of March in time for a cabinet meeting in mid-April. Unfortunately, I think that meeting in mid-April is only sort of held there for accidents and emergencies, so it's not really for routine business like this. So the clear advice has been to continue with our work as normal and then to sort of present it to your next meeting after the election. So that's what I'm going with at the moment.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much indeed for that. So the next scheduled meeting then of the Communities Overview Committee is Wednesday, the 23rd of June, 2021 at 10 o'clock in the morning. As this is our last meeting in this administration, can I just thank you all very much for your input over the 4 years that we've been in existence. I think we've done some good work. I think we've raised all sorts of issues which have been important. And I would also like to thank Daniel Webb for his unstinting support of this committee, and also our committee officers for all the work that they've put in to keep the show on the road. So thank you all very much indeed. I hope in the next iteration you will feel that you wish to rejoin the Communities Overview Committee in whatever form it takes. And all the best to everybody.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Celia.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, officers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.